The cathedral doors swing open, and Alara Whitcomb's world ends before she even reaches the altar. Duke Cassian Thornfield stands beneath the vaulted ceiling, bathed in light streaming through stained glass, but his eyes aren't on her. They're on the woman beside her, her sister. "I cannot marry you," he says, voice echoing off stone. "I choose Margot instead." The congregation gasps. Alara's knees buckle. Everything she was raised to be, perfect, obedient, worthy, shatters in a single sentence. If you want to see how a woman transforms rejection into revolution, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning had begun like a carefully orchestrated dream. Alara woke before dawn in the east wing of Whitcomb Manor, where she'd spent 23 years learning to become someone else's property. Her mother arrived with the maids at first light, supervising every detail. The ivory silk gown that cost more than most families earned in a year, the pearls that had adorned Whitcomb brides for 6 generations, the powder that made her skin look like porcelain instead of flesh. "Stand straighter," her mother said, circling her like a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. "Your posture must be impeccable. The Duke's family will be watching everything." Alara adjusted her spine. She'd been adjusting herself for as long as she could remember. Lady Catherine Whitcomb wasn't a warm woman. She was a strategist who'd married well and expected her daughters to do better. Love was a word she used only when discussing bloodlines. Duty was the religion she actually practiced. "Do you remember what I told you?" her mother asked, tugging at the gown's sleeves. "Yes, mother." "Tell me anyway." Alara recited the words she'd memorized years ago. "A wife is a reflection of her husband's status. I must be seen, admired, and never heard unless spoken to first. My opinions are his opinions. My purpose is his comfort and the continuation of his line." Her mother nodded, satisfied. "The Thornfields are among the most powerful families in the realm. This marriage will elevate us beyond anything your father's trade connections could achieve. Do not disappoint us." Disappointment. The word had followed Alara through childhood like a shadow. Not smart enough compared to her tutor's other students. Not charming enough compared to girls who laughed easily. Not ambitious enough compared to Margot. Her younger sister swept into the room without knocking, already dressed in a gown of pale rose that made her look like something painted by a master. Margot had always possessed the kind of beauty that seemed effortless, dark curls that fell perfectly, eyes that sparkled without trying, a smile that made people lean closer. "Oh, Alara," Margot said, her voice honey-sweet. "You look almost pretty." Their mother didn't correct her. Alara had stopped expecting her 2 years ago. The carriage ride to the cathedral took 40 minutes through streets lined with crowds. Common folk gathered to watch noble weddings the way they watched executions, hungry for spectacle, eager for something to gossip about later. Alara sat rigid across from her parents, hands folded in her lap, practicing the serene expression she'd perfected in front of mirrors. Her father, Lord Thomas Whitcomb, hadn't said a word since they'd left the manor. He was a practical man who'd built the family fortune through shipping contracts and strategic investments, but he'd always been clear that real power came from titles, not trade. This marriage would buy him access to circles that had looked down on him for decades. Alara was the price of admission. "You'll do fine," he said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. It was the closest thing to affection she'd heard from him in years. When they arrived at St. Sebastian's Cathedral, the crowd outside had swelled to hundreds. Alara stepped from the carriage into a wall of sound, cheers and whispers mixing into white noise. She kept her eyes forward, her smile fixed, her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. Inside, the cathedral was a masterpiece of architecture designed to make humans feel small. Vaulted ceilings stretched toward heaven, stained glass windows filtered sunlight into pools of colored light, and rows of pews held the entire aristocratic elite of the capital. Every family that mattered had sent representatives. Every eye turned toward her as she entered. Duke Cassian Thornfield waited at the altar. He was handsome in the way wealthy men often were, well-groomed, well-dressed, standing with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. They'd met exactly 4 times before this day, always under supervision, always in settings designed to prevent actual conversation. She knew he enjoyed hunting. He knew she played piano. Beyond that, they were strangers preparing to spend their lives together. But that was normal. Expected, even. Love could grow from duty, her mother had assured her. Respect would come with time. Alara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, each step measured and deliberate. The processional music swelled around her. Hundreds of faces blurred at the edges of her vision. She focused on Cassian, on the future she'd been promised, on the role she'd rehearsed her entire life. 10 feet from the altar, Cassian's gaze shifted. Not to her, past her. Alara's stomach clenched. She knew that look. She'd seen men look at Margot that way since her sister turned 16. Hunger mixed with fascination, desire wrapped in propriety's thin veneer. She reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Cassian's. The Duke's fingers were cold. The bishop began the ceremony, his voice rolling through the cathedral like distant thunder. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Alara barely heard him. She was watching Cassian's face, watching the way his jaw tightened, watching his eyes flick toward the congregation again and again, toward Margot. Her sister sat in the front pew, looking appropriately solemn. But there was something in her expression, a softness, a sadness, that Alara had never seen before. The bishop continued, "Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly." Cassian's hand trembled slightly in hers. "If anyone here has objection to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence. Then Cassian spoke. "I object." The words landed like stones thrown into still water, ripples of shock spreading through the congregation. The bishop froze mid-gesture. Alara's mother made a sound like something dying. "Your Grace?" the bishop managed. Cassian released Alara's hand. He turned to face the hundreds of witnesses packed into the pews, his voice steady and clear. "I cannot marry Lady Alara Whitcomb," he said, "because I am in love with another." The cathedral erupted into whispers, gasps, the rustle of fabric as people shifted to see better. Alara stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Cassian looked directly at Margot. "I love your sister," he said, as if that explained everything, as if love excused the destruction of every plan, every promise, every carefully constructed future. "I have loved her since we met at the spring festival. I tried to honor my obligations, but I cannot bind myself to one woman when my heart belongs to another." Margot rose from her seat, one hand pressed to her chest in a gesture of shocked innocence that looked rehearsed. Tears glittered in her eyes. "Cassian, no," she whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "We cannot—" "We can," he said firmly. "If you'll have me." The whispers became a roar. Alara's mother stood, face white with fury. Her father remained seated, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. Alara couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there in her sixth-generation pearls while her entire world collapsed around her. The bishop looked between Cassian, Margot, and Alara like a man watching a building burn, unsure where to throw water first. "Your Grace, this is most irregular. The contracts have been signed, the agreements made." "I will compensate the Whitcomb family for any financial losses," Cassian said. "But I will not marry without love, not when I've found it elsewhere." He turned to Alara then, and she saw something worse than hatred in his eyes. Pity. "You are a fine woman, Lady Alara," he said, as if conferring a great compliment. "You will make some other man a perfectly adequate wife, but I cannot be that man." Perfectly adequate. The words hit her like a slap. Not even good enough. Just adequate. Margot moved toward the altar, her steps hesitant, but her direction clear. People scrambled out of her way. When she reached Cassian, he took her hands in his with a tenderness he'd never shown Alara. "I'm sorry," Margot said, looking at Alara with those wide, innocent eyes. "I never meant for this to happen. We tried to resist, but love—" "Don't," Alara said. It was the first word she'd spoken since entering the cathedral. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Margot blinked. "Don't? Don't apologize," Alara said. "Don't pretend this wasn't planned. You've wanted everything I had since we were children. Congratulations. You finally took it." A collective intake of breath rippled through the congregation. Ladies didn't speak like that. Ladies didn't show anger, didn't make scenes, didn't voice the ugly truths everyone pretended not to see. Her mother grabbed her arm. "Alara, control yourself." She yanked free. The movement sent her veil slipping sideways. She didn't fix it. "Control myself?" She laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. "I have controlled myself my entire life. I have been obedient and quiet and perfectly adequate. And for what?" She looked at Cassian, at Margot, at the bishop who stood clutching his prayer book like a shield. "Keep him," she said to her sister. "Marry him. Have a beautiful life together. I hope you're very happy." She meant none of it. The words tasted like poison. Allura turned and walked back down the aisle. The crowd parted before her, people pressing against pews to avoid touching the woman who'd just been publicly rejected. She heard whispers following her like wolves. Never seen anything like... Poor thing. Imagine the humiliation. Always knew there was something wrong with her. The sister is much prettier anyway. She made it through the cathedral doors before her composure cracked. Outside, the crowd still waited, confused by the lack of ringing bells, by the bride emerging alone. Questions flew at her from all directions. Lady Allura, what happened? Where is the Duke? Are you married? She stumbled down the cathedral steps, grabbed the first carriage she saw, not even sure if it was hers, and climbed inside. Drive, she told the startled coachman. Anywhere, just drive. He did. The carriage lurched forward, carrying her away from the cathedral, away from the crowds, away from the wreckage of everything she was supposed to be. Allura sat in the dim interior, surrounded by ivory silk and inherited pearls, and finally let herself shake. Not tears, not yet. Just trembling, like her body was trying to adjust to the sudden absence of a future. She'd prepared for this day for years, had imagined every detail except this one. What do you do when the story you've been told your entire life turns out to be fiction? When the role you've rehearsed is given to someone else? The carriage rolled through unfamiliar streets. Allura pulled off her veil, then the pearl necklace, letting them fall to the floor. Her fingers found the tiny buttons running down her spine, but she couldn't reach them all. The dress held her like a cage she couldn't escape. Eventually the carriage slowed. The coachman's voice filtered through. My lady, where should I take you? Where should he take her? Not home. Her parents would be furious, humiliated, calculating damages. Not to friends. She didn't have any real friends, just other noble daughters she'd been thrown together with at social functions, all of them performing the same careful dance of appropriate behavior. There was only one person who'd ever told her she could be more than decorative. Ashford Street, she said. Number 47. The coachman hesitated. The Northern District, my lady? Are you certain? Yes. Ashford Street wasn't fashionable. It wasn't where ladies of quality were supposed to go unescorted, but it was where Aunt Philippa lived, and Aunt Philippa had always been the family scandal. Her father's sister who'd refused to marry, who'd taken her inheritance and bought a townhouse in a district where artists and writers lived, who'd filled her home with books and unconventional opinions. Allura's mother forbade visits. Her father pretended Philippa didn't exist. But when Allura was 12, Philippa had attended a family gathering and pulled her aside. You don't have to be what they're making you, she'd said. Remember that. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit their boxes. Allura hadn't understood then. She'd been too busy trying to be good, to be worthy, to earn approval that never quite came. She understood now. The carriage stopped before a narrow townhouse squeezed between a bookshop and a cafe, where people sat outside drinking coffee in full view of the street, scandalous and wonderful. Allura climbed out, still wearing her wedding gown, and knocked on the door. A maid answered, eyes widening at the sight of her. Is Lady Philippa home? Allura asked. She's in the library, but... Allura pushed past her, following the sound of piano music deeper into the house. She found her aunt in a room lined floor to ceiling with books, playing a complicated piece while sunlight streamed through uncurtained windows. Philippa looked up when Allura entered. She was 53, gray-haired, wearing a simple dress and no jewelry except a silver ring shaped like a bird. Her eyes took in the wedding gown, the disheveled hair, the absence of a groom. Well, she said, her hands stilling on the keys. This should be interesting. And then Allura did what she'd been trained never to do. She cried. Not delicate, decorative tears. Ugly, gulping sobs that shook her entire body. She sank to the floor in a puddle of silk and buried her face in her hands while everything she'd been holding together fell apart. Philippa came to sit beside her. She didn't offer platitudes or tell her to calm down or remind her that ladies didn't make scenes. She just sat there, close enough to be comforting, quiet enough to let Allura break. When the worst of it passed, when Allura could breathe again without choking, Philippa spoke. Tell me what happened. So Allura did. She told her about Cassian's rejection, about Margot's tears, about standing at the altar while her entire future evaporated. She told her about the whispers, the pity, the looks on people's faces as she'd walked back down the aisle. I did everything right, she said, her voice raw. Everything they told me to do. I was obedient. I was pleasant. I was perfect. And it didn't matter. He chose her anyway. Philippa was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting lightly on Ilara's shoulder. "Can I tell you something?" she said finally. "Something you won't want to hear?" Ilara nodded. "He did you a favor." Ilara's head snapped up. "What?" "That man," Philippa said, "who would humiliate you in front of hundreds of people because he couldn't control his desires for someone more exciting? Who would break contracts and promises because he wanted something shinier? He did you a favor by showing you exactly who he is before you were legally bound to him." "But I'm ruined," Ilara whispered. "No one will want me now. I'll be the girl who wasn't good enough, the one who got replaced at the altar. I'll be a cautionary tale." "Good," Philippa said firmly. "Good?" "Yes. Good. Because now you don't have to waste your life pretending to be someone you're not for the sake of someone who doesn't deserve you." She stood, offering Ilara her hand. "Come with me." She led Ilara to a washroom where hot water waited in a basin, helped her out of the wedding dress, unlacing and unbuttoning until Ilara could finally breathe, wrapped her in a simple robe and sat her down in front of a mirror. "Look at yourself," Philippa said. Ilara looked. She saw swollen eyes, blotchy skin, hair falling out of its careful arrangement. She looked nothing like the perfect bride who'd entered the cathedral that morning. She looked human. "This," Philippa said, gesturing at Ilara's reflection, "is what freedom looks like. It's messy and painful and not at all what you planned, but it's yours. What you do with it is entirely up to you." "I don't know what to do," Ilara admitted. "I only ever knew how to be his wife. That was supposed to be my whole life." "Then it's time you figured out who Ilara Whitcomb actually is," Philippa said. "And I can tell you right now, she's more than some man's perfectly adequate accessory." A knock at the front door interrupted them. The maid's voice drifted up. "Lady Philippa? Lord and Lady Whitcomb are here to see their daughter." Ilara's stomach dropped. "I can't face them. Not yet." "You don't have to," Philippa said. She called down, "Tell them Lady Ilara is resting and will contact them when she's ready." "They're quite insistent, ma'am." "Then they can insist all they want from the other side of my door." Raised voices filtered up from below, her mother's sharp tones, her father's gruff demands. Philippa closed the library door, muffling the sound. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said. "This house is yours. My life is yours. Whatever you need to figure out what comes next." "Why?" Ilara asked. "You barely know me. We've only met a handful of times." Philippa smiled sadly. "Because I was you once. Younger, angrier, but just as lost. And someone gave me a choice when I thought I had none." She squeezed Ilara's hand. "Now I'm giving you the same gift." For the first time since the cathedral, Ilara felt something other than devastation. It was small and fragile, barely more than a spark. But it felt like possibility. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Carriages rattled past. People bought bread and gossiped and lived their lives. Somewhere, Margot and Cassian were probably planning their own wedding, already rewriting history to make themselves the heroes of a love story instead of the villains of Ilara's tragedy. But here, in Philippa's library surrounded by books and sunlight, Ilara made her first real decision. She wouldn't go back. Not to her parents' house, not to her mother's expectations, not to the suffocating role of perfect daughter waiting for another chance to be someone's perfectly adequate wife. She would stay here. Learn to breathe. Figure out who she was when no one was watching, no one was judging, no one was telling her how to stand or speak or smile. It would be terrifying. It would be lonely. It would be hers. "Thank you," she told Philippa. Her aunt nodded. "Don't thank me yet. This is the easy part. Tomorrow, the real work begins." "What work?" "Learning to live for yourself instead of for them." Philippa gestured toward the window, toward the world beyond. "It's harder than it sounds. But I promise you, it's worth it." That night, Ilara slept in a guest room that smelled like lavender and old books. She lay awake for hours, listening to unfamiliar sounds. The cafe below closing for the night, voices of people walking home, the creak of old wood settling. At some point, exhaustion pulled her under. She dreamed of cathedrals with doors that wouldn't open, of wedding gowns that tightened like nooses, of running through streets while crowds whispered her name. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through unshuttered windows, and the whispers had already begun. The scandal moved faster than fire through dry grass. By the time Ilara woke that first morning in Philippa's guest room, her name was already being dissected in drawing rooms across the capital. The story had taken on a life of its own, mutating with each retelling until she barely recognized herself in the narratives people wove. Some versions painted her as a tragic figure, too boring to hold a man's attention. Others suggested she must have done something terrible to drive the Duke away. A few whispered that perhaps she was barren, frigid, defective in some essential way that Cassian had discovered just in time. The cruelest version, and therefore the most popular, claimed she'd known all along about Cassian and Margot, but had been too proud to step aside gracefully. Philippa showed her the gossip columns over breakfast 3 days later. "You should see what they're saying," her aunt said, spreading newspapers across the table like evidence at a trial. "Knowledge is armor. Ignorance just makes the knives sharper." Alara read them with hands that stayed steady through sheer force of will. "The Whitcomb wedding disaster," proclaimed one headline. "Duke chooses love over duty. Jilted bride flees in disgrace." Another was worse. What was wrong with her? Sources close to Duke Thornfield reveal the truth behind the shocking rejection. That article quoted anonymous aristocrats who claimed Alara had always been difficult, cold, unsuited to the demands of noble marriage. It suggested the Duke had shown remarkable courage in following his heart rather than shackling himself to an inadequate match. "They're rewriting history," Alara said quietly, "making me the villain so he can be the hero." "That's what people do," Philippa said. "They need simple stories. Brave Duke, true love, wrong woman gracefully removed from the equation. It's cleaner that way, easier to digest with their morning tea." "And Margot?" "Oh, your sister is being painted as a reluctant participant in fate's grand design. Star-crossed lovers who tried to resist but simply couldn't deny the power of their connection." Philippa's voice dripped sarcasm. "She's been seen weeping decoratively at various social functions, accepting comfort from concerned friends." Alara set down the newspaper before she crumpled it. "I need to do something." "Like what?" "I don't know. Defend myself, tell my side, make them understand." "Understand what?" Philippa interrupted. "That you were humiliated through no fault of your own? They already know that, darling. They just don't care. In fact, they enjoy it more because you didn't deserve it. There's a particular pleasure people take in watching someone innocent suffer." The words hit like cold water. Alara had spent her whole life believing that goodness would be rewarded, that following the rules would protect her. The cathedral had shattered that illusion. These newspapers ground the pieces into dust. "So what am I supposed to do?" she asked. "Hide here forever? Pretend none of it happened?" "No," Philippa said. "You're supposed to live. Build a life so interesting that their gossip becomes irrelevant." "How?" Her aunt smiled. "That's the beautiful part. You get to decide." But deciding proved harder than Alara expected. She'd spent 23 years being told what to want, what to value, what to become. Now, faced with actual choice, she felt paralyzed. The first week passed in a haze of sleeping late and avoiding mirrors. Philippa gave her space, let her wander the townhouse like a ghost, never pushed for conversation or plans or purpose. The second week, Alara started reading. She devoured books from Philippa's library, novels her mother would have called inappropriate, philosophy texts that questioned everything she'd been taught, memoirs of women who'd lived unconventional lives and survived. The third week, her parents sent a letter. Philippa brought it to her in the library, where Alara had claimed a corner by the window as her territory. "You don't have to read it," her aunt said. But Alara did. She needed to know. Her father's handwriting covered 2 pages in efficient, business-like script. He didn't waste words on comfort or sympathy. Instead, he outlined the situation with brutal clarity. The broken engagement had cost him the Thornfield alliance. 2 major shipping contracts had been canceled by families who didn't want to associate with scandal. 3 investment partnerships had quietly withdrawn. The family's social standing had plummeted. "You have embarrassed us beyond repair," he wrote. "Your mother is devastated. Your sister's upcoming wedding, yes, Margot and the Duke have announced their engagement, will require every penny we can muster to restore our reputation. Under the circumstances, we cannot afford to support you in addition to managing this crisis of your making." Alara read that line twice. Crisis of your making. As if she'd orchestrated her own public humiliation, as if she'd chosen to be rejected at the altar. The letter continued. "We have arranged a position for you as a companion to Lady Hartwell, a widow in need of assistance. The salary is modest but sufficient. You will take the position and comport yourself with appropriate gratitude and discretion. Further scandal will not be tolerated." At the bottom, her mother had added a single sentence in her angular script. This is more than you deserve. Alara set the letter down carefully, fighting the urge to tear it into pieces. What does it say? Philippa asked. They want to ship me off to be some old woman servant, and they blame me for everything. Of course they do. It's easier than admitting they raised you to be a commodity and got upset when the market rejected their goods. The bitterness in Philippa's voice surprised Alara. You're talking about your brother. I'm talking about a man who tried to do the same thing to me 30 years ago. Marry me off to someone appropriate, turn me into someone else's problem. She sat down across from Alara. I said no. It cost me my relationship with the family, my inheritance, well, most of it, and my place in society. But I got myself in return. Best trade I ever made. I'm not brave like you, Alara said. You think I was brave? I was terrified. I cried for weeks. Had moments where I almost went crawling back, begging them to forgive me, promising to be good. Philippa leaned forward. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway. Alara looked at the letter again, at her father's cold assessment of her worth. I'm not taking that position, she said. Good. But I can't stay here indefinitely, living off your charity. It's not charity, it's family, the kind that actually means something. Still, Alara insisted, I need to be able to support myself. I need to prove I'm more than what they say I am. Then we'll find you something. There are options for women willing to work. The word work should have sounded shameful. Ladies didn't work. They managed households, supervised servants, arranged flowers. Actual labor was beneath them. But Alara felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Interest. Maybe even excitement. What kind of options? She asked. Over the next few days, Philippa introduced her to a world Alara hadn't known existed. The Northern District was full of women who'd stepped outside society's narrow definitions, writers who published under male pseudonyms, artists who sold paintings to support themselves, women who ran businesses, managed properties, taught music or languages or mathematics. You could be a governess, Philippa suggested. You're educated, well-spoken, and notorious, Alara finished. No respectable family would hire me to influence their children. Then be a tutor to students whose families care more about competence than scandal. I don't know what I'm competent at. I can play piano adequately, speak French badly, and make polite conversation about nothing. Can you read? Of course. Write? Yes, but manage accounts, organize information, learn new skills? Alara paused. I suppose so. Then you're more competent than you think. You've just never been asked to use it for anything meaningful. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. The maid entered, looking nervous. Lady Philippa, there's a gentleman here to see Lady Alara, a foreign gentleman. He says it's important. Alara and Philippa exchanged glances. Did he give a name? Philippa asked. Raphael de Aragon, ma'am, Duke of Monteran. Alara's stomach clenched. She didn't know any dukes from Monteran, didn't know why one would be seeking her out. Foreign nobility occasionally visited the capital for diplomatic reasons, but they didn't call on disgraced women living in unfashionable districts. Should I send him away? The maid asked. No, Alara said, surprising herself. I'll see him. Philippa raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I'm tired of hiding, and I'm curious. She was also terrified, but that seemed less important. Raphael de Aragon waited in Philippa's receiving room, standing by the window with his back to the door. He turned when Alara entered, and she got her first clear look at him. He wasn't what she expected. Most dukes she'd encountered carried themselves with practiced superiority, as if their titles granted them inherent worth. This man looked like someone who'd earned his position through means less gentle than inheritance. He was tall, dark-haired, probably in his early 30s. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving his face a slightly dangerous cast. His clothes were expensive, but practical. No unnecessary ornament, no peacock display of wealth. His eyes were what caught her attention. Brown, direct, assessing. He looked at her like she was a person, not a scandal or a cautionary tale. Lady Alara, he said, his accent adding unfamiliar music to the words, thank you for seeing me. I'm not sure I should be thanking you or demanding an explanation for this intrusion, she said, pleased when her voice came out steady. A slight smile touched his mouth. Fair. I'll provide the explanation, and you can decide whether thanks are warranted. Please do. He gestured to a chair. She sat, and he took the one across from her, not hovering above her, not using height as power. It was a small thing, but she noticed it. I arrived in your capital 3 weeks ago, he began. Diplomatic mission, mostly ceremonial. I've been attending various social functions, observing your aristocracy at work. He paused. I was present at St. Sebastian's Cathedral on the day of your wedding. Alara's face heated. Then you witnessed your humiliation. Yes. I also witnessed your response. My response? You didn't collapse, didn't beg. You looked that man in the face and took back what dignity you could. Then you walked out with your head high. She remembered it differently. She remembered shaking, barely breathing, feeling like the floor was dissolving beneath her feet. I appreciate the generous interpretation, she said carefully, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this, because I recognized something in you that day. He leaned forward slightly. Do you know what they say about Monteran, Lady Alara? That it's harsh, mountainous, difficult to reach. All true. They also say we're barbarians compared to your civilized capital, that we value strength over refinement, capability over pedigree. His eyes held hers. They're not entirely wrong. Where I come from, titles mean nothing without the ability to defend them. Pretty words and proper etiquette won't save you when winter comes early, and half your people might starve. This is fascinating, Alara said, but I still don't understand. I need someone who can think, adapt, survive. He spoke quickly now, intensity creeping into his voice. My duchy lost its duchess 2 years ago. Since then, I've been managing alone. My advisors keep suggesting I remarry, find some suitable noble daughter to fill the role. Alara's heart began to pound. You came here to propose marriage to a woman you don't know? A woman who was publicly rejected 3 weeks ago? No, he said. I came here to offer you a choice. What kind of choice? Raphael stood, moved to the window, looked out at the street below. Monteran is nothing like this place. It's colder, harder, less forgiving. The castle is 600 years old and drafty. The court is small. We don't have grand balls or elaborate social seasons. What we have is work that matters. Decisions with real consequences, problems that require actual solutions. He turned back to face her. I watched you at that cathedral. You didn't perform grief the way you were supposed to. You got angry. You showed the truth of what you were feeling instead of what was expected. He paused. I need someone like that. Someone real. Not another decorative noble daughter playing duchess while I do the actual work. You're asking me to marry you, Alara said slowly, because I had an emotional breakdown at my failed wedding? I'm asking you to consider an alternative to whatever life you're building here. He gestured around the room. This is your aunt's house, your aunt's life. What's yours? The question hit harder than she expected. I don't know yet, she admitted. Then come to Monteran and find out. No promises, no immediate commitments. Come as my guest for 6 months. See the place. See if you're capable of the life there. See if you even want it. And if I don't, then you come back here and I'll find someone else. No scandal, no pressure, no obligation. It was insane. Going to a foreign duchy with a man she'd met 10 minutes ago, leaving behind everything familiar, even if that familiarity currently consisted of gossip columns and her parents' disappointment. Why me? She asked. Why not find someone from Monteran? Someone who already understands that life? Because everyone from Monteran already knows me, already has expectations, connections, family politics at play. He sat back down, and she saw exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. I inherited my title young, under circumstances that made people question my right to it. I've spent 12 years proving myself, fighting for every scrap of respect. I don't have the energy to also manage a wife's family machinations or court intrigues. So you want someone with no power, no connections. I want someone who doesn't need those things to be valuable. He met her eyes. You stood at that altar and had everything stripped away. Title, status, future, gone. And you're still here, still standing. That takes a kind of strength your society doesn't recognize. Mine does. Alara wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she possessed strength rather than just stubborn survival instinct. I need to think about this, she said. Of course. I'm staying at the Pemberton Hotel for another week. Send word when you've decided. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, he said. I won't lie to you, Lady Alara. I'm not offering romance or gentle courtship. If you come to Monteran and we eventually marry, it will be a partnership. Practical, functional, based on mutual respect and shared work. Nothing like the fantasy you were raised to expect. Good, she said, surprising both of them. I'm done with fantasies. After he left, Philippa appeared in the doorway. I listened, she said, not apologizing for it. What are you thinking? That he's either genuine or an excellent liar. Could be both. Philippa came to sit beside her. The question is, do you want to find out? Alara thought about her father's letter, still upstairs on her desk. About Lady Hartwell's companion position, a future spent managing someone else's comfort while her own life shrank to nothing. About staying here in Philippa's townhouse, safe and small, building a life on borrowed space. She thought about the cathedral, about Cassian's pity, about Margot's false tears, about being perfectly adequate. If I stay here, she said slowly, I'll always be the girl who got jilted. No matter what else I do, that will define me. The scandal will fade eventually, but the story will stick. I'll be a footnote in someone else's happy ending. True, Philippa said, but running away won't erase it either. I'm not running away, I'm running towards something. Something you know nothing about with a man you just met. Yes, Alara looked at her aunt. Is that crazy? Philippa laughed. Completely. But so was turning down an earl's proposal to buy this townhouse and live among artists and radicals. Crazy doesn't mean wrong. He said Montaran is harsh, difficult. And this place isn't? They're destroying you in drawing rooms and gossip columns. At least in Montaran, the harshness would be honest. That decided it. Alara wrote to Raphael that evening, telling him she would come to Montaran for the trial period. Not as a bride, not as a promise, but as someone willing to see if she could build something real from the wreckage of everything false. His response arrived the next morning. Simple, direct, practical. They would leave in 5 days. She should bring sturdy clothes. Weather in the mountains turned cold early. Those 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. Philippa helped her pack, including books Alara would have never been allowed to read in her parents' house. They went shopping in districts where merchants didn't know her face, buying travel clothes designed for function rather than fashion. On the third day, Margot appeared at the townhouse door. The maid announced her with obvious discomfort. Your sister is here, Lady Alara. Alara's first instinct was to refuse the visit, but curiosity won over anger. She found Margot in the receiving room, dressed in pale blue silk, looking like innocence personified. Her sister's eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. Alara, Margot breathed. Thank goodness. I've been so worried. Have you? It wasn't a question. Margot either didn't notice the flatness in her voice or chose to ignore it. Everyone's saying such terrible things about you. I wanted to come sooner, but Mother said I shouldn't, said it would only make things worse for both of us. Why are you here, Margot? Her sister's performance faltered. I wanted to apologize, properly. What happened at the cathedral? What you and Cassian planned, Alara corrected. We didn't plan it, it just happened. We fell in love, neither of us meant to hurt you. But you did it anyway. Margot's face crumpled. Real tears this time, or a better approximation. I know, and I'm so sorry, but Alara, you have to understand, when you truly love someone, you can't just ignore it. The heart wants what it wants. The platitude made Alara want to laugh, or scream. She settled for cold clarity. Did you know I used to envy you, she said. You were always the pretty one, the charming one. Things came easily to you, but I thought at least I had my purpose. I would marry well, fulfill my duty, make the family proud. That was mine. You can still marry well, there are plenty of men. You took the only thing I thought I had, Alara continued, and you're standing here asking me to understand, to forgive, to make this easier for you. I'm trying to make peace between us. No, you're trying to make yourself feel better about what you did. You want my blessing so you can marry Cassian without guilt hanging over your perfect love story. Margot's tears stopped. Something harder flashed across her face. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Fine. Margot stood, all pretense of contrition vanishing. Be bitter. Wallow in your humiliation. But don't expect sympathy when you're alone and miserable while I'm building a life with a man who actually loves me. I hope you're very happy together, Alara said. She meant it, not because she was generous, but because she'd realized something in the weeks since the cathedral. She didn't want what Margot had taken, didn't want Cassian, didn't want that life, didn't want any of it. She wanted something else entirely. Margot left in a rustle of silk and injured pride. Philippa emerged from wherever she'd been tactfully lurking. That went well, her aunt said dryly. She wanted me to absolve her, to tell her it was all right, that love conquers all. And instead you told her the truth. Good for you. Alara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I don't feel good about it. I feel hollow. That's because you're grieving. Not for him, but for the story you thought you were living. That takes time. I don't have time. I'm leaving in 2 days for a place I've never seen to try building a life I can't imagine. I know, Philippa said gently, but you're doing it anyway. That's what matters. The morning Alara was set to leave, her mother appeared. Lady Catherine Whitcomb swept into the townhouse like an avenging spirit, all fury and expensive perfume. She dismissed the maid with a gesture and confronted Alara in the entrance hall. I heard the most ridiculous rumor, her mother said, voice sharp as broken glass, that you're leaving the country with some foreign duke. Tell me it isn't true. It's true, Alara said. Her mother's face went pale, then flushed red. Have you lost your mind? After everything that's happened, you're going to create more scandal by running off with a stranger. I'm accepting a legitimate invitation to visit his duchy. Chaperoned, respectable. There is nothing respectable about a woman in your position traveling alone with a man. You'll be completely ruined. I'm already ruined, Mother. You said so yourself in your letter. More than I deserve, I believe were your exact words. Lady Catherine's mouth thinned. That was... You needed to understand the gravity of the situation. I understand perfectly. I embarrassed you, cost Father his business connections, became a liability instead of an asset. So now I'm removing myself from your portfolio. Don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being practical. Alara picked up her traveling bag. You wanted me gone. I'm going. To Monteran? That frozen wasteland? Her mother's laugh was bitter. You'll hate it there. You're not strong enough for that kind of life. The word should have stung. A month ago, they would have. But Alara had spent weeks reading about women who'd survived impossible situations, who'd built lives from nothing, who'd refused to let the world's limitations define them. Maybe you're right, she said. Maybe I'm not strong enough, but I'd rather fail trying something real than succeed at being decorative. Her mother stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You were such an obedient child, Lady Catherine said finally. What happened to you? I stood at an altar and realized obedience didn't matter. Following the rules didn't protect me. Being perfect didn't earn love. Alara met her mother's eyes. So I decided to stop trying to be what everyone else wanted and figure out what I actually am. And you think you'll find that in Monteran, with a man you barely know? I don't know, but I know I won't find it here. A carriage waited outside, Raphael's, sent to collect her. He'd offered to accompany her, but she'd asked him to wait at the port. This goodbye needed to be hers alone. Her mother followed her to the door. If you do this, don't expect to come crawling back when it doesn't work out. I won't, Alara said. She climbed into the carriage without looking back, without waiting to see if her mother would soften, would offer some final word of support or affection. Some stories didn't get neat endings. Philippa was waiting at the port, standing on the dock with wind whipping her gray hair. She pulled Alara into a fierce hug. Write to me, she demanded. Tell me everything. And if he turns out to be terrible, if you need rescue, send word and I'll come get you myself. Thank you, Alara said. For everything, for giving me space to fall apart and time to put myself back together. You did that yourself. I just provided the library. Raphael stood near the ship, giving them privacy. When Philippa finally released her, Alara walked toward him. He offered his hand to help her board. Ready? He asked. Alara looked back at the city one last time. Somewhere in those streets, Margot was planning her wedding. Her parents were managing their damaged reputation. The gossip columns were already moving on to newer scandals. None of it mattered anymore. Yes, she said, I'm ready. The ship pulled away from the dock, carrying her toward mountains she'd never seen, toward a future she couldn't predict, toward a version of herself that didn't exist yet. It was terrifying. It was freedom. And for the first time in her life, Alara Whitcomb chose it. The journey to Monteran took 8 days by ship and another 3 overland through terrain that grew progressively more hostile. Alara spent the first 2 days at sea violently sick, hunched over a basin in her cabin while the ship pitched and rolled. So much for making a dignified impression. Raphael checked on her once, took in the situation with a single glance, and returned an hour later with ginger tea and dry bread. "Eat this," he said, setting the tray on the small table bolted to the floor. "Small bites. It helps." "How do you know?" Alara managed between waves of nausea. "I grew up on these waters. Spent my first ocean voyage exactly like this." He steadied the cup as the ship lurched. "Gets easier. Your body adjusts." He was right. By the third day, she could stand on deck without her stomach rebelling. By the fifth, she actually enjoyed watching the coastline slip past. Cities giving way to forests, giving way to rocky cliffs that looked like the world's teeth. They didn't talk much during the voyage. Raphael spent most of his time in meetings with his small retinue, 3 advisors, a captain of his guard, and a woman named Isla, who seemed to function as some combination of secretary and strategist. Alara watched them work from a distance, noticing how differently they interacted compared to her father's business dealings. There was no posturing, no elaborate courtesies masking contempt. When someone disagreed with Raphael, they said so directly. When he was wrong, he admitted it. The meetings looked more like debates than performances. On the 6th day, Isla approached her on deck. "Lady Alara," she said, "may I join you?" "Of course." Isla was somewhere in her 40s, dark-haired and weather-worn, with hands that looked like they'd done actual work. She leaned against the railing, studying the horizon. "The Duke says you're coming to Monteron to see if you fit," she said without preamble. "That's right. Fair warning, you probably won't at first." Isla glanced at her. "Most people from the capital can't handle it. Too rough, too cold, not enough of the refinements they're used to." "Is this meant to discourage me?" "No, just manage expectations." Isla's expression softened slightly. "I've been with Raphael since he inherited his title 12 years ago. Watched dozens of noble women come through, hoping to catch his interest. Every single one left within a month." "Why?" "Because they wanted the title without the work. Wanted to play Duchess at parties while actual problems went unsolved." She turned to face Alara fully. "Raphael doesn't need ornamental. He needs functional. Can you be functional?" It was a fair question. Alara had no idea how to answer it. "I don't know what I can be yet," she said honestly. "I'm still figuring that out." Isla studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "At least you're honest. That's more than most manage." When they finally reached Monteron's port, Alara understood what Isla had meant. The city, if it could even be called that, was nothing like the capital. No grand architecture, no carefully planned streets. Buildings hunched against the wind, built from gray stone that blended into the mountains rising behind them. People moved with purpose, dressed for weather rather than fashion. And it was cold, bitterly, aggressively cold, even though it was barely autumn. "Welcome to Monteron," Raphael said, appearing beside her as she stared at the landscape. "Still interested? Ask me again when I can feel my fingers." He almost smiled. "Come on, the castle's another 2 hours by carriage." The road wound up into mountains that made Alara's ears pop. They passed through villages where people stopped work to watch the Duke's carriage pass, curious but not servile, acknowledging rather than bowing. The higher they climbed, the more barren the landscape became. Trees gave way to scrub, scrub gave way to rock. Then they rounded a curve, and Alara saw the castle. It wasn't beautiful. It was a fortress, built into the mountainside itself, all hard angles and defensive positions. 600 years old, Raphael had said, and it looked every day of it. Weathered stone, narrow windows, walls thick enough to withstand siege. "It's not much to look at," Raphael said, watching her reaction. "It looks like it could survive the end of the world." "That's the idea." Inside was warmer, but not by much. The entry hall was massive, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows and fireplaces large enough to walk into. Tapestries hung on the walls, faded with age, depicting battles and hunts and scenes Alara didn't recognize. A man waited in the hall, elderly, stern-faced, dressed in dark formal clothes that looked like they belonged to a previous century. "Lady Alara Whitcomb," Raphael said. "This is Henrik, the castle's steward. Henrik, Lady Alara will be staying with us for the foreseeable future." Henrik bowed slightly. "My lady, your rooms have been prepared in the East Wing. Dinner is served at 7. The Duke keeps a working schedule. Breakfast at 6, meetings throughout the day. If you have questions, I am available." It was the most formal speech she'd heard since arriving, also the coldest. "Thank you," Alara said. Henrik led her through corridors that seemed to go on forever, upstairs worn smooth by centuries of feet, past rooms whose purposes she could only guess at. Finally, he opened a door onto a suite that was surprisingly comfortable, smaller than her rooms at home, but warmer, with thick rugs and a fire already burning in the hearth. "Your maid will arrive shortly," Henrik said. "Is there anything you require immediately?" "No, thank you." He left without another word. Alara stood in the center of the room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the castle, wind howling somewhere above, voices echoing from distant corridors, the crackle of the fire. She'd done it. Actually left everything behind and come here, to this fortress at the edge of the world. Now what? The answer came sooner than expected. A knock at the door revealed a young woman carrying an armful of clothes. "Lady Alara? I'm Maren, assigned to assist you. The Duke thought you might need these." She dumped the clothes on the bed. Wool dresses, thick stockings, a coat lined with fur. "Your things from the capital won't work here. Too delicate." "I see." Maren looked her over with frank assessment. "You're thinner than I expected. We'll need to adjust the waist on most of these. Can't have you freezing because your clothes don't fit properly." She worked efficiently, marking adjustments, explaining which pieces were for which purposes. Unlike the maids Alara had grown up with, Maren didn't defer or simper. She was there to do a job, and she did it. "Dinner's in an hour," Maren said when she finished. "I'll come back to help you dress. Fair warning, it's not formal here. People show up, eat, leave, no performances." After she left, Alara explored the suite. A bedroom, a small sitting room, a washroom with a tub that looked like it could fit 3 people. Everything was solid, built to last, maintained but not luxurious. She found herself thinking about her room at home, at her parents' house, the one she'd never see again. All those carefully chosen fabrics, the paintings selected to demonstrate refined taste, the jewelry box full of pieces meant to enhance her value as a potential bride. None of it had mattered in the end. Maren returned to help her into one of the adjusted dresses, deep green wool, simple but well made. No corset, thank everything. No elaborate hair arrangement, just clean, practical, warm. "You look less like a capital lady now," Maren said with approval. "More like someone who belongs here." Dinner was held in a hall half the size of the entry, with a single long table where perhaps 20 people sat. Raphael was at the head, deep in conversation with an older woman who was gesturing emphatically. Others were scattered along the sides, some in fine clothes, others in what looked like work gear. Raphael noticed Alara and gestured to an empty seat halfway down the table. Not beside him, not in any position of honor. Just a chair. She sat. The man next to her, grizzled, with scarred hands, glanced over. "You're the lady from the capital," he said. "Alara, yes." "Torben, I manage the mountain quarries." He went back to his food without further ceremony. Across from her, a younger woman with ink-stained fingers was reading while eating. Next to Torben, 2 men argued in what sounded like a different language entirely. No one performed. No one monitored their manners for watching eyes. People ate, talked, left when they were finished. It was chaos compared to the formal dinners Alara was used to. It was also strangely honest. After the meal, Raphael caught up with her in the corridor. "Survived your first dinner," he said. "Barely. I didn't know which fork to use because there was only one fork." "We don't bother with that here. Food is food. Formality doesn't make it taste better." They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps echoing off stone. "Tomorrow," Raphael said, "I'd like you to sit in on the morning council meeting, see how things actually work here." "Why?" "Because if you're going to decide whether you can build a life in Monteran, you need to understand what that life would involve. And it's not attending parties or managing servants." "What is it then?" "Solving problems. Making decisions that affect hundreds of people. Dealing with crises that don't care about your comfort or convenience." He stopped, turning to face her. "I meant what I said on the ship. I need a partner, not a decoration. If that doesn't interest you, better to know now." Alara thought about her mother's careful lessons in being decorative, about years spent learning to be seen and admired but never heard. "I'll be at the meeting," she said. The council gathered at dawn in a room dominated by a massive table covered in maps, ledgers, and what looked like engineering diagrams. Ila was there, along with Henrik, Torben from dinner, and 3 others Alara didn't recognize. They looked up when she entered, curious but not unwelcoming. Lady Alara will be observing, Raphael said. No explanation, no justification, just fact. He dove immediately into business. Report on the northern mine situation. One of the men Alara didn't know, introduced as Marcus, the mining supervisor, spread out a diagram. The tunnel collapse blocked the main vein. We've cleared most of the debris, but the support structure is compromised. We need to decide whether to reinforce and continue or abandon that section entirely. Cost to reinforce? Raphael asked. 3,000 marks minimum, possibly more if we find additional damage. Timeline? 6 weeks if weather holds, 3 months if it doesn't. Raphael studied the diagram, his expression unreadable. Production loss if we abandon? 20% annual output from that mine. The room fell silent. Alara could feel the weight of the decision pressing down. 3,000 marks was significant. She'd heard enough of her father's business discussions to know that. But 20% production loss was worse. What about the workers? She asked. Everyone turned to look at her. She felt her face heat but pushed forward. If you abandon the section, what happens to the people who worked there? Marcus blinked. They'd be reassigned to other areas or let go if no positions are available. How many workers? 37. Raphael leaned back in his chair, studying her. Why does that matter to the decision? Because it's not just about cost and production. It's about whether 37 families can feed themselves this winter. She hesitated, then continued. And if you let them go, you lose their expertise. Training new workers later costs time and money, too. Isla made a small sound. Approval or surprise? Alara couldn't tell which. She's right, Isla said. We'd spend at least 1,000 marks replacing that knowledge base. Raphael nodded slowly. So the real cost of abandoning isn't just production loss. It's production loss plus replacement training plus the social impact of putting families out of work in a region that doesn't have alternative employment. Exactly, Marcus said, looking at Alara with new interest. Then we reinforce, Raphael decided. Find the money. I want weekly progress reports. Next issue. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. They discussed water rights disputes between villages, timber quotas, a proposed trade agreement with a neighboring duchy. Every topic was debated, questioned, examined from multiple angles. Alara realized she was watching actual governance, not the decorative councils her father occasionally mentioned, where nobles pretended to advise while protecting their own interests. This was people trying to solve real problems with limited resources. It was also exhausting. By the time the meeting ended, her head hurt from trying to track every argument. You ask good questions, Raphael said as people filed out. The worker concern wouldn't have occurred to me immediately, too focused on the numbers. It's obvious, though. To you. Most people from the capital wouldn't think of miners as people, just resources to be allocated. The days that followed established a pattern. Alara attended morning meetings, spent afternoons reading through historical records and current reports, trying to understand Monteron's complex web of relationships and obligations. Evenings, she walked the castle, learning its geography, meeting staff and guards and officials. She also started noticing problems no one was addressing. The kitchen staff worked in a space so poorly organized they wasted hours every day searching for supplies. The record-keeping system was a disaster. Important documents mixed with irrelevant correspondence, nothing properly indexed. The East Tower had a leak that was damaging historical tapestries no one seemed to care about. Small things. Fixable things. She mentioned the kitchen to Marin one evening. Oh, we all know it's a mess, Marin said. But that's how it's always been. Nobody has time to reorganize it. What if I did? Marin stared at her. You want to reorganize the kitchen? You're a lady. I'm a person with time and organizational skills. Why waste them? Word spread faster than she expected. The next morning, Henrik appeared at her door. I understand you have concerns about the castle's operational efficiency, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I have observations, yes. The Duke would like to speak with you. She found Raphael in his study, surrounded by paperwork. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from weeks of insufficient sleep. Henrik says you want to reorganize the kitchen, he said without preamble. I noticed inefficiencies that could be corrected relatively easily. And the record-keeping system? That needs a complete overhaul. Your current filing method is essentially archaeological. You have to dig through layers of sediment to find anything useful. He almost smiled. Anything else? The East Tower leak is damaging historical artifacts, and your staff scheduling is creating unnecessary conflicts. People are working double shifts while others have gaps of wasted time. A better rotation system would solve both problems. Raphael set down his pen. You've been here 10 days and you've already cataloged half a dozen systemic issues. I had a lot of free time, and I'm good at noticing patterns, clearly. He leaned back. Here's the problem. If I let you fix these things, it sends a message about your position here. People will assume you're acting as Duchess, making decisions, claiming authority. Is that bad? It could be. If you're planning to leave in a few months, it creates instability. People won't know who to listen to. Alara hadn't thought about that. She'd been so focused on solving problems, she'd forgotten the political implications. What if I'm not planning to leave? She said. The word surprised her as much as him. Raphael studied her carefully. Are you saying you want to stay? I'm saying I'm starting to see why you needed someone who could actually do the work. This place isn't about appearances or social climbing. It's about keeping hundreds of people alive and functional in a difficult environment. She paused. That matters more than I thought anything could. He was quiet for a long moment. Fix the kitchen, he said finally, and the records, and whatever else you find. But understand, if you do this, you're making a choice. People will see you as part of the leadership structure. There's no going back to being a casual observer. I understand. Do you? Because the moment you start making changes, you become a target. Anyone who benefits from the current chaos will resist you. Anyone who wants influence will test you, and everyone will be watching to see if you're actually capable or just playing at being useful. Let them watch, Alara said. She meant it. The kitchen reorganization took 3 days of hard work. Alara rolled up her sleeves, literally, and got her hands dirty sorting supplies, creating inventory systems, rearranging workspace for maximum efficiency. The staff watched her with bemused skepticism that gradually shifted to grudging respect. By the end, the head cook actually smiled at her. Haven't been able to find things this fast in 15 years, she said. You've got a gift for this, my lady. The records took longer. Alara spent 2 weeks in a dusty archive room, sorting decades of correspondence, creating categories, building an index system. Henrik initially resisted, suspicious of change, but even he had to admit the new system worked better. You've made my job significantly easier, he said one evening, the closest he'd come to expressing approval. The Duke chose better than I expected. Word of her work spread beyond the castle. Village leaders started requesting her presence at meetings, wanting her input on organizational problems. She helped restructure a grain storage system that had been losing product to rot. She redesigned a water distribution schedule that reduced conflicts between farmers. She was useful. Actually, tangibly useful in ways she'd never been allowed to be before. And people noticed. 6 weeks into her stay, Isla pulled her aside after a council meeting. We need to talk, she said, her expression serious. They went to Isla's office, a cluttered space filled with correspondence and maps. Isla closed the door. You're making enemies, she said bluntly. Alara's stomach dropped. Who? Lord Vance, for one. He's been the Duke's primary advisor on domestic affairs for 8 years. Watching you solve problems he's ignored is making him look incompetent. I wasn't trying to undermine anyone. Doesn't matter. Intent is irrelevant. Result is what counts. Isla sat on the edge of her desk. There's also talk among some of the noble families. Questions about who you are, where you came from, what your intentions are regarding the Duke. We're not, again, doesn't matter. You're here, you're effective, and Raphael listens to you. That makes you a threat to anyone who wants to control his decisions. Alara felt suddenly cold. What should I do? Keep doing exactly what you're doing, but be aware that people will try to discredit you. They'll dig into your past, find the cathedral story, use it against you. They already know I was rejected. Raphael told the council when I arrived. He told them you were visiting. He didn't tell them the details. And details matter. Isla's expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. If you're going to be part of this, really part of it, you need to understand the landscape. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, looking out at mountains that were just darker shapes against a dark sky, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd escaped one society that judged and diminished her, only to enter another where her competence made her threatening. The next morning, the attack came. She was in the library reviewing trade documents when Lord Vance entered. He was a heavy man in his 50s, dressed in the elaborate style of capital nobility, completely inappropriate for Monteron's practical atmosphere. "Lady Alara," he said, his tone oily, "I've been meaning to speak with you." Lord Vance. He sat without being invited, spreading himself across the chair like he owned the space. "I've been hearing such interesting stories about you," he said, "about your previous engagement." Alara's hand stilled on the documents. "Have you? Apparently you were meant to marry Duke Thornfield. Quite the catch. But he chose your sister instead. At the altar, no less. How embarrassing." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "If you have a point, please make it. The point is that you're here under false pretenses, presenting yourself as some kind of organizational genius when really you're just a rejected bride looking for a new meal ticket." He smiled. "The Duke deserves to know the truth about what kind of woman you are." Rage flooded through her, hot and clean. She stood slowly. "The Duke knows exactly who I am and where I came from. I've been honest about everything." Her voice was steady despite the fury. "Can you say the same?" Vance's smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've been reviewing financial records, including the domestic budget you've managed for the past 8 years. Interesting discrepancies in allocation versus actual expenditure, almost like someone's been skimming funds." His face went red. "How dare you? How dare I notice that numbers don't add up? That's literally what you've been criticizing me for, paying attention to details." She stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this library. You're going to stop spreading gossip about my past, and you're going to hope I don't look too closely at those discrepancies. You wouldn't dare accuse me. Try me." They stared at each other. Finally, Vance stood, his movements jerky with barely contained anger. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." After he left, Alara's hands started shaking. She sank back into her chair, adrenaline making her lightheaded. The door opened. Raphael entered, and she realized he must have heard everything. The library's acoustics carried sound better than she'd thought. "Did you actually find discrepancies in his accounting?" he asked. "Yes. I wasn't planning to mention them unless necessary, but show me." She spread out the documents she'd been reviewing, pointing out the patterns she'd noticed. Raphael studied them with growing anger. "He's been stealing from the duchy for years," he said quietly. "Right under my nose. You were focused on larger problems. That's what he counted on." Raphael looked at her with something she couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "You just made a powerful enemy," he said. "I already had one. At least this time I'm fighting back." He smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since she'd known him. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I want to show you." He led her up through the castle to the highest tower, where windows looked out over the entire region. Mountains stretched in every direction, villages clustered in valleys, smoke rising from hundreds of hearths. "This is what I inherited," Raphael said. 600 square miles of harsh terrain, 3,000 people trying to survive it, and a council full of men like Vance who see my duchy as a resource to exploit. "How did you inherit it? You mentioned unusual circumstances." His expression darkened. "My uncle held the title. He had no children, so it should have passed to his brother, my father. But my father died when I was 12. Hunting accident, they said. Very convenient for my uncle's rivals. What happened? My uncle named me his heir anyway. Ignored tradition, ignored the other claimants, chose a 19-year-old with no experience." He gazed out at the landscape. "Took me years to understand why. He was dying, knew he didn't have time to groom anyone properly. So he chose the person least likely to be corrupted. Someone too young to have made alliances, too unknown to be bought. That must have been terrifying. It was. Still is some days." He turned to her. "That's why I need someone I can trust. Someone who sees problems and fixes them, instead of pretending everything's fine while they profit from the chaos." "Is that why you came looking for me? Because I'd been publicly humiliated and had nothing left to lose?" "Partly. Also because in that cathedral I saw you choose dignity over desperation. You could have begged, could have made a scene, could have tried to manipulate the situation. Instead, you walked away." He paused. "That takes strength most people don't have." Alara thought about that day, about standing in front of hundreds of people while her world collapsed. "I didn't feel strong," she admitted. I felt destroyed. Strength isn't the absence of being destroyed, it's what you do after. They stood in silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting snow-covered peaks in shades of orange and red. I want to stay, Ilara said. Not just for 6 months, permanently. Raphael was very still. As what? As whatever you need. Partner, duchess, co-conspirator against corrupt advisors. She turned to face him. You were right. I can't go back to what I was, but I don't want to anyway. This place, this work, it matters in ways I didn't know were possible. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Vance won't let this go. He has allies, connections. Let him try, Ilara interrupted. I'm done being the kind of woman who runs when things get difficult. Raphael studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. Then we should probably make it official, he said. People need to know where you stand, what authority you have. Otherwise, every decision you make will be questioned. You're asking me to marry you. I'm offering you a position. Marriage is the mechanism that makes it legally binding. It should have been unromantic, clinical even, but Ilara found it strangely honest. When? She asked. Tomorrow. Small ceremony, just the council and essential staff. Nothing like the cathedral. Yes, good. They returned to the main hall where the evening meal was beginning. Raphael stood at the head of the table and raised his hand for silence. I have an announcement, he said. Lady Ilara Whitcomb and I will be married tomorrow at noon. Anyone who has objections can voice them now. The hall erupted into noise, surprise, speculation, a few cheers. Lord Vance sat frozen, his face purple with rage. Isla caught Ilara's eye from across the room. She raised her cup in a small salute. Acknowledgement of the choice, the risk, the commitment. Ilara raised hers in return. She was doing this. Actually doing this. Marrying a man she'd known for less than 2 months, binding herself to a duchy she'd only just begun to understand, stepping into a role she had no training for. It was insane. It was also the first real choice she'd ever made. That night she wrote to Philippa, telling her everything, ended the letter with, I think I'm finally becoming someone I don't hate. Thank you for showing me it was possible. The next morning she woke to find Marin in her room, holding a dress of deep blue wool, beautifully made but practical. From the Duke, Marin said, for the ceremony. It fit perfectly. No corset, no elaborate construction, just clean lines and quality fabric. Ilara looked at herself in the mirror. She looked nothing like the perfect bride who'd walked down the cathedral aisle. Her hair was simpler, her face less painted, her bearing more solid. She looked real. The ceremony was held in the castle's small chapel, stone walls, narrow windows, a handful of witnesses. Raphael wore formal clothes, but nothing ostentatious. The words were simple, functional, binding. When it ended, Ilara was a duchess. The celebration after was modest, food, drink, toasts from council members. Lord Vance was notably absent. As the evening wore on, Isla pulled Ilara aside again. Vance left this afternoon, she said quietly. Took several chests of documents and rode south. Where? Your capital, most likely. He'll try to weaponize your past, use it to undermine you. Ilara felt ice in her stomach. He'll tell them I married Raphael. My parents, Margot, everyone who watched me get rejected, will learn that you moved on, built something new, became someone with actual power instead of just a cautionary tale. Isla's expression was fierce. Let him spread his gossip. You're a duchess now. You have authority, position, the ability to affect real change. What are you going to do with it? The question settled over Ilara like a mantle. What was she going to do with it? She thought about the mine workers, about efficient kitchens, about fixing broken systems, about all the ways the world told women to be small, decorative, powerless. Everything, she said. Isla smiled. Good answer. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. It was from her mother, and it was venomous. Every line dripped with outrage. How dare Ilara humiliate the family further by marrying some foreign duke? How could she be so selfish? What would people think? Ilara read it once, then fed it to the fireplace. The second letter came from Margot. You always have to take what's mine, it said. First you try to trap Cassian with duty, and when that fails, you go find yourself another duke. You're pathetic. That one hurt more, but not as much as it would have 2 months ago. The third letter was from Cassian himself. I heard you married. Congratulations. I hope you find the happiness we both deserve. She actually laughed at that one. The audacity of him, wishing her happiness after destroying her previous life. But she was happy, she realized, not in the simple, uncomplicated way she'd been taught to want. This was messier, harder, built on work and purpose rather than romance. It was also real. Raphael found her burning Cassian's letter in the study fireplace. News from home? He asked. From my previous life. It doesn't matter anymore. He nodded, then handed her a document. New crisis. Northern border dispute with the Duchy of Halvard. They're claiming we've been encroaching on their territory. Have we? No. But they're looking for an excuse to renegotiate our trade agreements. They think we're vulnerable because of leadership transition. Alara scanned the document, her mind already working on the problem. They're wrong. We're not vulnerable. We're stronger. Are we? She looked up at him. Yes. Because now you have someone watching your back instead of trying to exploit your blind spots. Now we can actually fix the broken systems Vance and others use to maintain power. Now... A commotion outside interrupted her, shouting, the sound of horses, doors slamming. Henrik burst into the study, his usual composure shattered. Your Grace, there's been an attack on the southern villages, raiders from across the border. They've burned 3 settlements and taken hostages. Raphael was moving before Henrik finished speaking, calling for his captain of guards, demanding reports, organizing response. Alara stood frozen, the border dispute document still in her hand. This was what Isla had meant. This was the reality of Monteran, not just organizational inefficiency and political maneuvering, but actual violence, actual danger to the people who depended on Raphael's protection. How many hostages? Raphael asked. 12 confirmed, possibly more. Casualties? Unknown. The survivors are traumatized, reports are inconsistent. Raphael turned to Alara. I have to go. The raiders will expect pursuit, but they won't expect it this fast. If we move now, we might catch them before they cross back over the border. I'm coming with you, she said. No. Raphael, this isn't negotiable. You're needed here. If I die out there, someone has to hold the duchy together. The words hit her like cold water. If he died. She'd married him, become a duchess, started building something real. And now he was riding into danger that could end everything. Be careful, she managed. He gripped her hand briefly. Hold the fort. Trust no one who smiles too much. And if Vance returns, have him arrested. Then he was gone, taking half the guard with him, leaving Alara standing in the study with Henrik and Isla and the sudden terrifying reality of responsibility. What do I do? She asked. Ila's expression was grim. What Raphael told you, hold the fort, keep the duchy running, and pray he comes back alive. The castle felt different with Raphael gone. Quieter. Colder. Like a body missing its vital organs. Alara stood in the war room. She refused to think of it as Raphael's study anymore. Staring at maps she barely understood. Red marks indicated the attacked villages. Blue lines showed possible raider routes. Scribbled notes detailed troop movements, supply chains, defensive positions. Henrik hovered near the door, waiting for orders she didn't know how to give. The council is gathering, he said. They'll expect you to address them. About what? I don't have updates. Raphael's only been gone 3 hours. They'll want reassurance, direction, someone to tell them what happens next. Alara wanted to laugh. She'd been a duchess for less than a month. Before that, she'd been a failed bride, a decorative daughter, someone whose greatest accomplishment was arranging flowers without disturbing their symmetry. What did she know about running a duchy during a crisis? Give me 10 minutes, she said. Henrik nodded and left. Isla appeared moments later, carrying documents. Supply reports, she said, dumping them on the desk. If Raphael's gone longer than a week, we'll need to adjust food distribution. The southern villages that weren't burned will need support. Refugees are already heading north. How many? At least 50. Probably more by tomorrow. Alara's mind raced. 50 people needing shelter, food, medical care. The castle could handle it, but the villages along the route couldn't. They'd already be stretched thin from harvest preparations. We need to set up waypoints, she said, thinking aloud. Temporary shelters every 10 miles along the northern road. Stock them with basic supplies. Bread, blankets, medical kits. Isla raised an eyebrow. That'll cost money we don't have budgeted. Then we'll take it from somewhere else. What's less essential right now than keeping people alive? The council won't like it. You're making financial decisions without their approval. Then they can complain to Raphael when he returns. If he returns. Alara shoved that thought down hard. How long to set up the waypoints? 2 days if we move fast. Do it. After Isla left, Alara allowed herself 30 seconds of pure terror. Her hands shook. Her breath came too fast. The weight of responsibility felt like it might crush her entirely. Then she straightened her spine, smoothed her dress, and walked to the council chamber. 12 people waited around the massive oak table. The remaining advisors, military officers, Henrik, various officials whose exact roles Alara still hadn't fully memorized. They stood when she entered, and the gesture felt both respectful and assessing, waiting to see if she'd crumble. She sat in Raphael's chair at the head of the table. It felt presumptuous. It also felt necessary. Update on the Duke's mission, she asked. Captain Gregor, who'd stayed behind to manage castle defenses, spoke first. Last report came 2 hours ago. They've tracked the raiders to the border canyon. No engagement yet. Casualties on our side? None reported. Small mercy. Alara turned to the others. The immediate crisis is the displaced villagers. We're establishing waypoints along the northern road to provide temporary support. I'll need volunteers to staff them and supplies allocated from emergency reserves. A man she recognized as Lord Petron, one of Vance's former allies, leaned forward. Your Grace, with respect, that's a significant expense for what may be a temporary situation. People fleeing burned homes isn't temporary, Lord Petron. It's a humanitarian crisis requiring immediate response. But the Treasury has funds earmarked for exactly this kind of emergency. Or are you suggesting we tell refugees to wait for the next budget meeting? Petron's mouth thinned. I'm suggesting we exercise fiscal responsibility. And I'm exercising ducal authority. The waypoints will be established. She looked around the table. Anyone else have concerns they'd like to voice? Silence. Not agreement. Alara could see resistance in several faces, but recognition that she wasn't asking permission. Good. Captain Gregor, what's our defensive posture if the raiders return? We've doubled patrols on the southern perimeter. Reinforced the village closest to the border. If they come back, we'll see them coming. And if they don't come back? If this was just opportunistic raiding? Gregor exchanged glances with the other military officers. Then we've wasted resources on heightened alert. Or we've demonstrated that Monteron responds decisively to threats, which might discourage future attacks. Alara pulled the border dispute document toward her. Speaking of threats, we still have the Halvard situation. They're claiming territorial encroachment. That's been ongoing for months, Petron said dismissively. It can wait until the Duke returns. Can it? Because it seems to me that if Halvard thinks we're vulnerable right now, they might escalate. Test our defenses while our Duke is out hunting raiders. The table went quiet. Alara saw comprehension dawning on several faces. You think the raider attack and the border dispute are connected? Isla said slowly. I think the timing is suspicious. Halvard makes claims just as raiders, who supposedly came from across a different border, attack our southern villages. Meanwhile, our military response pulls troops away from the northern frontier where Halvard's been probing. Captain Gregor sat up straighter. If you're right, we've left our northern border exposed. How many troops do we have stationed there currently? 50. Down from our usual 100 because we sent reinforcements south. Alara's stomach clenched. Send 30 more north. Pull them from Castle Guard if necessary. Your Grace, Gregor protested, that leaves us vulnerable here. The castle has walls and defensible positions. The northern villages don't. If Halvard moves while we're distracted, people will die. She met his eyes. Send the troops. He nodded slowly. Yes, Your Grace. The meeting continued for another hour. Logistics, resource allocation, contingency planning. Alara made decisions based on incomplete information and hoped she wasn't leading people into disaster. When it finally ended, she retreated to the study and allowed herself to collapse into a chair. Henrik appeared with tea. You handled that well. I made educated guesses and hoped they sounded authoritative. That's what leadership usually is. He set the cup in front of her. For what it's worth, the Duke chose well. Coming from Henrik, that was high praise. The next 3 days blurred together. Reports came in constantly. Refugees arriving at waypoints, northern troops taking positions, southern scouts tracking the raiders' retreat. Raphael sent brief messages confirming they'd engaged the enemy, recovered some hostages, Pursued the remainder across the border. No casualties on their side. 7 raiders dead. 5 hostages still missing. Alara barely slept. She spent nights reviewing supply manifests, morning councils addressing new crises, afternoons visiting the refugee shelters that had sprung up around the castle. People needed to see her, needed to know someone was managing the chaos. She met a woman named Sarah who'd fled with 3 children when the raiders burned her village. Sarah's husband had stayed behind to fight. She didn't know if he was alive. "Will the Duke bring them back?" Sarah asked, gripping Alara's hand. "The ones they took?" "He's trying," Alara said. It was the only honest answer she could give. On the 4th day, Halvard made their move. Captain Gregor burst into the war room where Alara was meeting with Ila about winter provisions. "Halvard troops crossed the northern border 2 hours ago," he said. "They're claiming it's a peacekeeping mission to secure disputed territory, but they're armed for combat." Alara's heart hammered. "How many?" 200. They've occupied the village of Westmarch." "Have they harmed anyone?" "Not yet, but they've declared the village under Halvard protection and told our people to evacuate." Isla swore softly. "If we let them keep Westmarch, they'll push further. Next it'll be the mining settlements, then the timber operations. They'll carve us apart piece by piece. And if we fight, we start a war we might not win," Alara said. "Raphael took half our fighting force south. We don't have the numbers." "So what do we do?" Alara stared at the map, at Westmarch marked in blue, now occupied by enemy forces. She thought about Sarah and her missing husband, about refugees fleeing burned homes, about all the ways violence cascaded from one crisis into another. "We don't fight," she said slowly. "We negotiate." Gregor looked skeptical. "Your Grace, Halvard doesn't want negotiation. They want territory. They want the appearance of strength. They're counting on us being too depleted to respond effectively, so they're grabbing what they can while we're distracted." She stood, moving to the map. "But what if we're not distracted? What if we respond so decisively they realize they've miscalculated?" "How?" An idea was forming, reckless and possibly stupid. "Send a message to Halvard's commander. Tell him the Duchess of Monteron requests a meeting to discuss their concerns about the border. Tomorrow. In Westmarch." Isla's eyes widened. "You're going to walk into an occupied village and meet with hostile forces?" "I'm going to demonstrate that we're not weak or distracted, that we're capable of addressing their claims through proper channels instead of military escalation." "They could take you hostage," Gregor said bluntly. "They could, but kidnapping a duchess during peace negotiations would turn every neighboring duchy against them. Halvard needs allies more than they need Westmarch." Alara hoped that was true. "Send the message." That night she wrote to Raphael, told him what she was doing, why she thought it would work, and apologized in advance if she was about to start a war. She also wrote to Philippa, a shorter letter, just in case it was the last one. "I'm finally doing something that matters. Thank you for teaching me that was possible. If this goes badly, know that I don't regret any of it." The ride to Westmarch took 6 hours through terrain that grew progressively more hostile. Alara brought 20 guards, enough to look serious, not enough to seem threatening, and Isla, who refused to let her go alone. "If you're doing something this stupid, at least have someone there to document it," Isla said. The village came into view around midday. Halvard soldiers lined the perimeter, their blue and silver uniforms stark against the gray stone buildings. A commander waited in the village square, tall, bearded, wearing armor that suggested he expected combat. Alara dismounted, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. Her guards formed up behind her, hands conspicuously away from weapons. "Commander," she said, "thank you for agreeing to meet." He studied her with undisguised skepticism. "You're the Duchess?" "I am." "You look young." "I am young. I'm also the person with authority to negotiate on Monteron's behalf." She gestured to the village around them. "Shall we discuss this rationally, or would you prefer to continue the armed occupation?" His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Your reputation precedes you, Your Grace. They say you're the cast-off bride who somehow convinced Duke Raphael to marry her. They say a lot of things. Most of it gossip from people with too much time and too little purpose." She met his eyes. "I'm here to discuss the border, Commander, not my personal history." He gestured to a building that had clearly been commandeered as temporary headquarters. Inside, maps covered a makeshift table. Alara recognized the border region, saw marks indicating Halvard's territorial claims. Your duchy has been encroaching on Halvard territory for decades, the commander said. We're simply reclaiming what's rightfully ours. According to which treaty? Alara asked. The Treaty of Ravensmarch, signed 80 years ago. That treaty was superseded by the Compact of Stone Ridge 50 years ago, which established the current border. She pulled documents from the satchel Isla had helped her prepare. Here's the original text. You'll note the specific geographical markers that place Westmarch firmly within Monteron territory. The commander frowned, scanning the documents. These could be forgeries. They're certified copies from the regional archive. I brought originals as well, if you'd like to verify the seals. She spread them on the table. I'm not here to argue history, Commander. I'm here to understand what Halvard actually wants. We want the territory that belongs to us. No. You want the resources that territory provides. The timber, the water rights, the strategic position? Alara pointed to the map. But occupying Westmarch won't give you those things sustainably. You'll have to hold it by force, which means permanent military presence, which means expense and conflict. What's your alternative? Renegotiate the trade agreements, give Halvard better terms on the timber they've been trying to access, establish shared water rights that benefit both duchies, create a formal alliance that makes territorial disputes irrelevant. The commander sat back. You're offering to give us what we want without us having to fight for it. I'm offering a solution that benefits both sides without people dying. Isn't that preferable to war? My duke sent me to secure territory. Your duke sent you to make Halvard stronger. There are multiple ways to do that. Alara leaned forward. If you return having secured valuable trade concessions and a strategic alliance, you'll look more competent than if you return holding one village by force while starting a regional conflict. He was silent for a long moment, studying her face. They said you were clever, he said finally, that the Duke of Monteron married a woman who could think. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Both, probably. He stood, walking to the map. I need to consult with my duke. These decisions aren't mine to make alone. I understand. How long? 2 days? Maybe 3. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we maintain our positions. Your people stay out of Westmarch, mine stay in. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than open combat. Alara nodded. Agreed. I'll expect your response within 3 days. She turned to leave, then paused. Commander? One more thing. The raiders who attacked our southern villages, do you know anything about them? His expression gave nothing away. Why would I? Because the timing was convenient. Monteron gets hit from the south just as Halvard starts pushing from the north. Feels coordinated. Perhaps you have more enemies than you realized, Your Grace. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone thought a new duchess would be too inexperienced to see the pattern. She smiled coldly. Tell your duke that inexperience and incompetence aren't the same thing. The ride back to the castle felt longer than the journey out. Alara's hands wouldn't stop shaking, adrenaline finally catching up to her now that the immediate danger had passed. That was either brilliant or insane, Isla said quietly. Possibly both. Did I just make things worse? No. You bought us time and gave them an exit that doesn't require violence. Whether they take it depends on how reasonable Halvard's duke actually is. They reached the castle as evening fell. Henrik met them at the gate, his expression unreadable. The duke has returned, he said. Alara's heart leapt. Is he hurt? Minor injuries, nothing serious. He's in the war room, demanding to know why you rode into hostile territory without his permission. She almost laughed. Of course he was angry. She'd made a major diplomatic move without consulting him, potentially risked her life, definitely exceeded her authority. She found Raphael bent over maps, still wearing travel-stained clothes, a bandage wrapped around his left forearm. He looked up when she entered, and the fury in his eyes made her step back. What were you thinking? He said, voice low and dangerous. That we were about to lose the northern border while you were hunting raiders in the south. So you decided to handle it yourself? Ride into an occupied village with 20 guards and hope Halvard wouldn't take you hostage? They wouldn't risk the diplomatic fallout. You don't know that. You can't know that. He slammed his hand on the table, making maps jump. You could have been killed, kidnapped, used as leverage against me. Do you understand that? I understand that someone needed to act, Alara shot back. You were gone. Halvard was moving. Waiting for you to return meant giving them time to fortify positions and establish claims. So yes, I acted. Without consulting anyone. I consulted Isla, Gregor, the council. They advised against it. I did it anyway. She stepped closer. You married me because you needed someone who could make decisions and solve problems. That's what I did. I married you because... He stopped, jaw clenching. You took an unnecessary risk. Like chasing raiders across the border, like engaging enemies on their territory, that kind of unnecessary risk? They stared at each other, fury crackling between them. This is different, Raphael said finally. How? Because I'm trained for combat. You're not. So my value is only in decisions that don't put me in danger? I should stay safe in the castle while you handle everything that matters? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because it sounds like you want a partner who's useful but not too independent. Capable, but only within limits you define. Alara's voice rose. I thought you wanted someone real. Turns out you wanted someone obedient with better organizational skills. Raphael's expression shifted, anger giving way to something more complicated. I want you alive. Is that such an unreasonable thing? The words hit her differently than she expected. Not a demand for obedience. Fear dressed up as fury. I am alive, she said more quietly, and I successfully negotiated a potential solution that might prevent a war. Might. Better than definitely starting one by letting them keep Westmarch unchallenged. He exhaled slowly, some of the rage bleeding out of his posture. Tell me what you offered them. She explained the trade proposal, the water rights sharing, the alliance framework. Raphael listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. That's actually not terrible, he admitted. Expensive, but cheaper than sustained conflict. And it gives us leverage. If Halvard accepts, they're bound by treaty. If they reject it, we have documented proof we tried diplomacy, which makes them the aggressors in any future conflict. You thought of that? I read the archives. History is just patterns repeating. I figured I should learn the patterns. Raphael sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. The hostages? You got them back? Most of them. 2 didn't survive. His voice was flat. Sarah's husband was one of them. Alara's throat tightened. She thought of Sarah's desperate hope, her children waiting for their father. I have to tell her, she said. I'll do it. No, she asked me if you'd bring him back. I told her you'd try. This is my responsibility. She found Sarah in one of the refugee shelters, surrounded by her children. The woman looked up when Alara entered, hope and fear warring across her face. Alara didn't make her wait. I'm so sorry. Your husband fought bravely, but he didn't make it. Sarah's face crumpled. Her eldest child, a girl maybe 10 years old, wrapped arms around her mother while the younger ones started crying, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of grief anyway. Alara stayed while Sarah sobbed, held the woman's hand, promised that Montaran would support her family, that her children would be fed and sheltered, that her husband's sacrifice mattered. It felt inadequate. Words always did in the face of loss this massive. Later, walking back to the castle in darkness, Isla fell into step beside her. You did well today, Isla said, both with Halvard and with Sarah. I didn't do anything. Her husband is still dead. You gave her certainty instead of false hope. You stayed when it would have been easier to leave. That matters. Alara wasn't sure she believed that, but she appreciated Isla saying it. The next morning, a messenger arrived from Halvard. Their duke wanted to meet, not his commander, the duke himself, to discuss Alara's proposal personally. He's calling your bluff, Raphael said when she told him. Wants to see if you can negotiate with him directly. Then I'll go. Not alone. I didn't plan on going alone. They rode to the neutral ground Halvard had specified, a meadow halfway between their territories. Halvard's duke brought a full retinue. Raphael matched it. Duke Henrik of Halvard was older than Raphael, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He dismounted and approached without fanfare. Duke Raphael, Duchess Alara. He nodded to each of them. I understand you have a proposition. I do, Alara said, but first, I'd like to understand what you're actually trying to accomplish, because occupying Westmarch seems inefficient if your real goal is resource access. Henrik's mouth quirked. You're direct. I'm practical. Political theater wastes everyone's time. Fair enough? He gestured for them to walk, leaving the retinues behind. Halvard has been struggling with timber shortages for 3 years. Our forests were overharvested by my predecessor. Meanwhile, Monteran has surplus timber and no buyers for it. So this was about trade leverage, Raphael said. Among other things. Also about demonstrating that Halvard isn't weak, that we're willing to fight for what we need. Demonstrating through raider attacks on civilian villages? Elara asked. Henrik's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. The raiders came from the south but disappeared across western passes that happened to border Halvard territory. The timing coincided with your territorial claims. Either that's remarkable coincidence or coordinated strategy. Careful, Duchess. You're accusing me of war crimes. I'm stating observations. What you do with them is your choice. She stopped walking. Here's mine. I don't care if you orchestrated the raids or just took advantage of them. What I care about is preventing it from happening again. And how do you propose to do that? Alliance. Formal, binding, with trade agreements that give you the resources you need and us the markets we need. Mutual defense clauses that make attacking either duchy an attack on both. Shared border patrols to prevent raider incursions. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to choose pragmatism over posturing. Your duchy needs timber. Mine needs stable borders and trade partners. We can fight over scraps or build something functional. Henrik looked at Raphael. You let her do your negotiating? She's better at it than I am, Raphael said simply. The older duke studied them both for a long moment. Then he smiled, genuinely smiled. I like you, he told Elara. You're either fearless or too inexperienced to know when you should be afraid. Probably both. Good. Fear makes people stupid. He turned back toward his retinue. I accept your proposal. We'll hammer out details within the month. In the meantime, my troops will withdraw from Westmarch. And the raids? Raphael asked. Will cease, assuming they were ever connected to Halvard in the first place. Henrik's expression was bland, which of course they weren't. After he left, Raphael turned to Elara. You just made a treaty with a man who probably orchestrated an attack that killed 2 of our people. I made a treaty that prevents future attacks from killing more people. That's the trade. Doesn't that bother you? Everything about this bothers me. But being bothered doesn't change the reality that peace is more useful than vengeance. They rode back to Monteran in silence. That night, Raphael found her in the study, reviewing the notes she'd taken during the negotiation. I'm sorry, he said. She looked up. For what? For yelling at you about Westmarch. You were right. Someone needed to act, and you did. I was angry because I was afraid, and that's not fair. Elara set down her pen. I'm sorry, too, for scaring you. For acting without full consultation, for being reckless. You weren't reckless. You were decisive. He sat across from her. That's different. Is it? Reckless is acting without thinking through consequences. Decisive is acting despite the risks because the alternative is worse. He paused. You're good at this. Better than I expected. That's a low bar. It's an honest one. He leaned forward. When I brought you here, I thought you might be capable of helping manage the duchy's administrative chaos. I didn't expect you to negotiate treaties and prevent wars. Neither did I. But you did it anyway. Because someone had to, and I was the someone available. She met his eyes. That's what you taught me. In Monteran, titles don't matter without the ability to use them. I'm using mine. 3 weeks later, formal word came from the capital. Lord Vance had returned, spreading stories about Elara's past, trying to undermine her reputation. The gossip columns were having a field day. The rejected bride who'd somehow snagged another duke, probably through manipulation or deception. Margot had given an interview suggesting Elara had always been ambitious in unhealthy ways. Her mother claimed the family was devastated by her choices. Elara read the reports and felt nothing. The scandal that would have destroyed her 3 months ago now seemed irrelevant. What did capital gossip matter when she was negotiating treaties and managing refugee crises? Does it bother you? Raphael asked. What they're saying. It bothers me that they think I care what they say, like their opinions still define my worth. They don't? No. My worth is defined by whether I can help feed refugees and prevent wars and keep this duchy functional. She looked at him. That matters more than whether some gossip columnist thinks I'm manipulative. Raphael smiled, the real smile she'd learned to recognize, the one that meant genuine approval rather than polite acknowledgement. You've changed, he said. I had to. The person I was wouldn't have survived here. Good. That person was wasted anyway. A month after the Halvard Treaty was formalized, representatives from 3 other duchies arrived requesting meetings. Word had spread that Monteron's young duchess was accomplishing things people hadn't thought possible, reforming broken systems, negotiating successful treaties, demonstrating that capability mattered more than pedigree. One of the representatives was from Duke Cassian Thornfield's duchy. Elara met with him in the formal receiving room, dressed in Monteron blue, wearing the duchess's seal on her hand. The representative, an older man named Lord Ashford, bowed formally. Your Grace, Duke Thornfield sends his regards and requests a trade discussion regarding grain distribution. Does he? Your reforms to Monteron's agricultural scheduling have resulted in impressive surplus. We'd like to purchase some of that surplus. Elara let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Tell Duke Thornfield that Monteron is open to trade negotiations with reliable partners, partners who honor their commitments and act with integrity. Ashford's expression tightened. Your Grace, if this is about business, Lord Ashford, nothing more. If Duke Thornfield wishes to negotiate, he can send formal proposals through proper channels. I'll review them based on merit. After he left, Isla appeared in the doorway. That was satisfying to watch, she said. Was it petty? Probably. Also justified. Isla sat across from her. You know what people are saying? That Monteron got lucky when Raphael found you. That you're the real power behind the throne. That's ridiculous. Raphael makes military and strategic decisions while you handle everything else. It's a partnership. But you're the visible one right now, the one people are watching. Elara thought about that. About how she'd gone from being defined by a man who rejected her to being recognized for work she'd done herself. I'm okay with that, she said. That evening she wrote to Philippa. You were right about freedom being messy. It's also exhausting, terrifying, and occasionally glorious. I'm not the same person who left your townhouse. I'm not sure who I am yet, but I'm learning. Thank you for giving me the space to try. P.S. I negotiated a treaty that prevented a war. Thought you'd be proud. Philippa's response came 3 weeks later. Of course I'm proud, you brilliant girl. You've become exactly what I hoped, someone who refuses to be limited by other people's expectations. The capital is still gossiping, but increasingly it's with grudging respect rather than pure scandal. Vance tried to paint you as a social climber. Instead, you've demonstrated that climbing toward competence is more impressive than climbing toward status. Keep building your mountain fortress. I'll keep cheering from my townhouse. 6 months into her marriage, Elara stood on the same tower where Raphael had first shown her the duchy. The view looked different now, not because the landscape had changed, but because she understood what she was looking at. Those villages needed better irrigation. That forest required sustainable harvest planning. The northern border settlements could benefit from improved communication networks. Problems everywhere. Solutions within reach. Raphael joined her, bringing 2 cups of something warm that definitely wasn't tea. What is this? She asked. Mountain wine. Technically illegal in most places. Tastes like regret and poor decisions. She sipped it. He wasn't wrong. Henrik sent word, Raphael said. The alliance is working. Raider activity along both our borders has dropped to almost nothing. Trade is up 30%. That's good. It's better than good. It's proof that your approach works. He looked at her. Other duchies are watching, wondering if they should take Monteron more seriously. We've always been serious. We've always been ignored. There's a difference. He paused. There's talk of a regional summit. All the duchy leaders meeting to discuss trade, defense, shared resources. They want it hosted here. In Monteron? In the castle, the rejected bride turned into a center of actual competence. He smiled. Think you can handle hosting 50 aristocrats who will be watching your every move? Elara thought about the cathedral, about standing in front of hundreds of people while her world ended, about building something new from those ruins. Yes, she said. I can handle it. The preparations for the summit consumed 6 weeks of brutal work. Elara coordinated renovations to guest quarters that hadn't been used in decades, organized supply chains to feed 50 aristocrats, accustomed to luxury, and navigated the impossible politics of seating arrangements where every chair placement carried diplomatic weight. She slept 4 hours a night and stopped remembering what rest felt like. "You're going to collapse," Marin said one morning, finding Alara already dressed and working at her desk before dawn. "I'll collapse after the summit." "That's not how bodies work, my lady." "Then my body will have to adapt." But Marin was right. 3 weeks before the summit, Alara's hands started shaking so badly she couldn't hold a pen. The castle physician, a stern woman named Dr. Voss, ordered her to bed for 2 full days. "You're no use to anyone dead from exhaustion," Voss said, blocking the door when Alara tried to leave. "Sleep, actually sleep, or I'll dose you with something that forces it." Raphael found her in her room, staring at the ceiling, mind racing through uncompleted tasks. "Voss threatened to chain me to the bed if I tried to work," Alara said. "She told me. I gave her permission." He sat in the chair beside her bed. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Trying to be perfect. Trying to prove you're worthy by never failing, never resting, never showing weakness." The words stung because they were true. Alara had thought she'd left that version of herself behind in the capital. Apparently, she'd just found new ways to perform the same exhausting dance. "I have to get this right," she said. 50 duchies watching, judging, waiting for me to fail. So what if you do? So what if something goes wrong at the summit? You'll handle it. That's what you do. He leaned forward. But you can't handle anything if you've worked yourself into the ground. I'm fine. You're shaking. You haven't eaten a full meal in days. You snapped at Henrik yesterday for something that wasn't his fault. His voice softened. I'm not criticizing. I'm worried. Alara felt tears prick her eyes, which was absurd. She didn't have time for tears. What if they're right? She whispered. The gossip columns, Margot. Everyone who said I was inadequate. What if I'm just faking competence and the summit exposes me? Then you'll be exposed as someone who faked competence so well she negotiated treaties, reformed broken systems, and prevented a war. Raphael took her hand. That's not inadequacy. That's adapting. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe she'd actually transformed into someone capable instead of just performing capability better. Rest, Raphael said. Everything else can wait 48 hours. She slept 16 hours straight, woke feeling marginally human, and dove back into preparations with Isla standing guard to prevent another collapse. Delegate, Isla ordered, you don't have to personally oversee every detail. But, no, Henrik handles accommodations. I'll manage the formal sessions. You focus on the opening reception and making sure nothing catastrophically fails. She softened slightly. You've built a good team. Trust them to do their jobs. It went against every instinct Alara had developed. The need to control everything, to ensure perfection through personal oversight. But she tried. Let Henrik make decisions about room assignments. Let the kitchen staff plan menus without her input. Let Gregor handle security protocols. The world didn't end. Things actually ran smoother. 2 days before the summit, the first guests arrived. Duke Henrik of Halvard came with a small retinue and an expression of genuine curiosity. He greeted Raphael formally, then turned to Alara. Duchess, your fortress is less forbidding than I expected. We saved the forbidding parts for the actual summit, she said. He laughed. I'm looking forward to seeing what you've built here. The reports I've heard are impressive. That night, more arrivals. Duchy after duchy, each bringing their own expectations and agendas. Alara greeted them all, remembering names, making connections, performing the social dance she'd been trained for while adding substance beneath the performance. By the evening before the summit officially began, 47 duchies had sent representatives. 3 notable absences, including Duke Cassian Thornfield. He's not coming, Lord Ashford said when Alara inquired. He sends his regrets and delegates me to represent his interests. Alara wondered if Cassian was avoiding her or simply didn't consider the summit important enough for personal attendance. Either way, his absence felt like a gift. One less complication to manage. The opening reception was held in the Great Hall, which Alara had transformed from drafty fortress to something approaching grandeur. Tapestries covered the coldest stone walls. Fireplaces roared at both ends. Tables groaned under food that demonstrated Monteron's agricultural improvements without descending into the wasteful excess capital nobility favored. 50 aristocrats mingled, forming clusters based on existing alliances or shared interests. Alara moved through them like a diplomat, listening more than speaking, noting tensions and opportunities. She found Duke Henrik in conversation with 3 other Northern Duchy representatives, discussing shared border security concerns. The raider problem isn't isolated to our region, one was saying. The Eastern Territories have been hit repeatedly. Because we're not coordinating, Henrik said. Each duchy treats security as individual responsibility. We need regional cooperation. Like the alliance between Montaran and Halvard? Another asked, looking at Alara. Similar concept, she said. Shared patrols, information exchange, mutual defense agreements. Raider groups operate across borders. Our response should too. Expensive proposition. Cheaper than constant raids. And more effective. She gestured to Henrik. Our raider incidents dropped 80% after formalizing cooperation. That's not coincidence. The conversation expanded, other duchies joining as Alara outlined the framework she and Henrik had developed. By the end of the reception, 6 duchies had expressed interest in joining the security alliance. Raphael found her later, standing by a window, watching guests filter toward their quarters. You just built the foundation for a regional defense network, he said. I made suggestions. They built interest. Don't minimize it. You're changing how these duchies interact. He paused. People are noticing. Good noticing or bad noticing? Both. Some see opportunity, others see threat. He nodded toward a cluster of Southern Duchy representatives. That group has been questioning your legitimacy all evening, wondering if you're actually qualified or if I'm letting you play Duchess because you're pretty. Alara's jaw tightened. Let them wonder. Or you could prove them wrong tomorrow during the formal sessions. How? By being exactly who you are, someone who solves problems instead of performing status. The first formal session began at dawn with 47 duchy representatives gathered in the council chamber, expanded temporarily to accommodate everyone. Raphael opened with brief remarks about regional cooperation, then yielded the floor to Alara. She stood before 50 faces ranging from curious to skeptical to outright hostile. We're here to discuss trade, security, and shared resources, she said. But before we dive into specifics, I want to address the question I know many of you are asking. Why is Montaran hosting this summit, and why am I leading these discussions instead of the Duke? Silence. She'd named the unspoken tension directly. The answer is simple. Montaran has spent the past 8 months testing new approaches to old problems. Agricultural reform, administrative efficiency, treaty negotiation based on mutual benefit rather than zero-sum competition. These experiments worked. She gestured to the documents distributed before each representative. Those reports detail our results. Production increases, cost reductions, conflict prevention. The numbers speak for themselves. A Southern Duke, Lord Brennan, old and traditionally minded, spoke up. With respect, Duchess, numbers can be manipulated. How do we know these results are genuine? Visit our villages, inspect our records, interview our people. Alara met his eyes. I'm not asking you to trust my word. I'm asking you to verify the evidence. And if we find discrepancies? Then you'll have learned something valuable about evaluating claims. Either way, you win. Someone laughed. Henrik, appreciating the response. A few others joined him. The question isn't whether I'm qualified to lead this discussion, Alara continued. The question is whether what we've learned in Montaran can benefit other duchies. I think it can. You're here because you think so too, or you wouldn't have made the journey. She spent the next 4 hours presenting their reforms in detail. Agricultural scheduling that reduced waste, record systems that improved administrative efficiency, treaty frameworks that created win-win outcomes instead of victories requiring someone else's defeat. Representatives asked sharp questions. She gave sharper answers. When she didn't know something, she said so directly and promised to investigate. When challenged, she defended with evidence rather than rhetoric. By midday, the room's energy had shifted. People were taking notes, asking for copies of implementation documents, discussing how to adapt Montaran's approaches to their own territories. During the lunch break, Isla pulled her aside. Lord Brennan is telling everyone you're the most competent administrator he's encountered in 30 years, she said. Coming from him, that's remarkable. He's probably just surprised I can count. He's surprised you don't waste time on ego and status games. So is everyone else. Isla smiled. You're making them reconsider what leadership looks like. The afternoon session focused on the Security Alliance proposal. Alara outlined the framework, then stepped back and let Henrik lead the discussion. This was his expertise. She knew when to defer. They debated structure, funding, command hierarchy, response protocols. Arguments grew heated at times, but stayed focused on substance rather than personal attacks. By evening, 12 duchies had committed to the alliance. 8 more wanted time to consider. It was more progress than Alara had dared hope for. That night, exhausted but wired, she found herself in the library. Someone else was there, a woman about her age wearing the colors of a coastal duchy. "Duchess Alara," the woman said. "I'm Lady Sorrel, representing the Duchy of Wavecrest. I wanted to speak with you privately." "Of course." Sorrel sat, her expression uncertain. "I heard about what happened at your first wedding, the rejection at the altar." Alara's stomach clenched. Of course someone would bring it up. She'd been waiting for this. "What about it?" she asked carefully. "I wanted to say thank you." That wasn't what Alara expected. For what? For surviving it and building something real anyway. Sorrel looked down at her hands. "I was married 3 years ago. Political arrangement, like most of them. My husband is not a good man. He's cruel in small ways that don't leave visible marks. I've spent 3 years trying to be perfect enough that he'll treat me better." "That's not how it works," Alara said quietly. "I know. I think I've always known. But watching you, hearing how you left your old life behind and made yourself into something more than anyone expected, it made me think maybe I could too." Alara felt the weight of that confession. "I didn't have a choice. I was forced out." "But you didn't let being forced out destroy you. You turned it into opportunity." Sorrel met her eyes. "How? Honestly, I don't fully know. I made decisions that felt impossible at the time, trusted people I barely knew, did work I wasn't trained for, failed a lot, kept going anyway." She paused. "There's no formula, just deciding you're worth more than what other people say you are. Is it worth it? The uncertainty, the struggle?" Alara thought about the cathedral, about standing in ivory silk while her future evaporated, about Philippa's library and Raphael's fortress, and the slow, painful work of becoming someone new. "Yes," she said, "it's worth it." Sorrel left looking thoughtful. Alara stayed in the library, wondering how many other women were trapped in lives that slowly crushed them, waiting for permission to want something different. The second day of the summit brought practical work sessions, smaller groups tackling specific issues. Trade route optimization, water rights disputes, agricultural knowledge sharing. Alara moved between groups, offering input where useful, mostly letting experts talk to each other. She found Raphael in a session on military cooperation, listening to Gregor present Monteron's defensive innovations. He looked tired but satisfied. "It's going well," he said when she joined him. "Better than I feared, worse than I hoped," which is probably realistic. 12 Security Alliance commitments is significant. 6 more trade agreements in negotiation, and half the duchies here are asking for our administrative documentation. He glanced at her. "You've accomplished more in 2 days than most summits manage in a week." "We've accomplished it. This wasn't just me." "No, but you're the reason it's happening." He lowered his voice. "Duke Brennan asked if you'd be willing to visit his duchy as a consultant, help them implement similar reforms." Alara blinked. "He did?" "So did 3 others. They're offering to pay for your expertise." The idea was absurd and thrilling simultaneously. People wanting to pay her, not for her family name or her decorative value, but for actual knowledge she'd built through work. "What did you tell them?" "That it's your decision. If you want to spend time consulting, we'll make it work." The third day brought the arrival Alara had been dreading. A messenger appeared during the morning session, handing Henrik a note. The Halvard Duke read it, frowned, and passed it to Raphael, who passed it to Alara. "Duke Cassian Thornfield has arrived. He requests an audience with Duchess Alara at her earliest convenience." Her hands went cold. Cassian was here. Actually here. In her fortress, requesting to see her like they were strangers with business to conduct, instead of 2 people whose last meeting had involved public humiliation. "You don't have to see him," Raphael said quietly. "Yes, I do. Not seeing him makes it seem like he still has power over me." "Does he?" Alara thought about that. 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, facing Cassian would have destroyed her. Now? "No," she said. "He doesn't." She found him in one of the smaller receiving rooms, standing by the window with his back to the door. He turned when she entered, and she saw the shock on his face, quickly masked but unmistakable. "Alara," he said, "you look different." "I am different." She stayed near the door, maintaining distance. What do you want, Cassian? I came to apologize. That surprised her. Did you? What I did at the cathedral was unforgivable. I was cruel and thoughtless, and you deserved better. He stepped closer. I've regretted it every day since. Ilara studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. She saw only discomfort, a man who'd done something terrible and was trying to make amends years too late. Why now? She asked. Because I heard what you've built here. The reforms, the treaties, the respect you've earned. And I realized I threw away someone extraordinary because I was too shallow to see past surface attraction. You didn't throw me away. You rejected me publicly, chose my sister, and humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. Her voice stayed level. Those aren't the same thing. I know, He faltered. I wanted you to know that I was wrong. About everything. And what do you expect me to do with that information? I don't know. Forgive me? Understand that I've grown? Ilara almost laughed. Forgiveness isn't something you can request like a business favor, Cassian. You destroyed my entire life. Or what I thought was my life. You made me a cautionary tale. You turned me into a symbol of inadequacy. I didn't mean intent doesn't erase impact. She moved further into the room, claiming the space. But here's the thing you don't understand. You did me the biggest favor of my life. He blinked. What? By rejecting me, you freed me from a future spent being perfectly adequate for someone who would never actually see me. You gave me the push I needed to leave everything false behind and find something real. She smiled without warmth. So thank you, genuinely. You breaking our engagement was the best thing that ever happened to me. You're saying you're grateful? I'm saying your cruelty accidentally created opportunity. I took it, built something you'll never understand because you still think relationships are about who's prettiest or most charming. She walked toward the door. We're done here. Enjoy the summit. Wait, he called. Margot and I, we're not happy. The marriage is difficult. Ilara paused. That's not my problem. I know. I just thought you should know that choosing her wasn't the fairy tale everyone thinks it is. Cassian, Ilara said, turning back to face him one last time. I don't care about your marriage. I don't care if you're happy or miserable. You're not part of my life anymore. You're barely even a memory. She let that sink in. Go home to your difficult wife and figure out your own problems. I have work to do. She left him standing there and felt lighter than she had in months. Raphael found her an hour later reviewing trade proposals in the war room. How did it go? He asked. He apologized. Wanted me to know he regrets everything. And I told him the truth, that rejecting me was the best thing he ever did for me. She set down the document she'd been reading. Is that cruel? It's honest. There's a difference. He looked devastated, like he'd expected me to either forgive him or rage at him, and neither would have satisfied whatever he was looking for. Raphael sat across from her. He was looking for you to still care. Either direction, love or hate, would have meant he still mattered to you. He doesn't. I know. That's what devastated him. The summit's final day focused on formalizing agreements. Treaties were signed, alliance frameworks approved, trade deals finalized. Ilara witnessed 47 duchies commit to cooperation that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Duke Brennan approached her after the closing session. Duchess Ilara, he said formally. I misjudged you initially. I apologize. Why? Why did I misjudge you, or why am I apologizing? Both. He smiled slightly. I misjudged you because I assumed youth and beauty meant incompetence. A foolish bias I'm working to correct. I'm apologizing because being wrong doesn't excuse spreading that wrong judgment to others. Apology accepted, though I'd prefer you just treat competent people as competent going forward, regardless of their age or appearance. Agreed. He handed her a sealed letter. Formal request for consulting services. My duchy desperately needs administrative reform. I'm willing to pay substantial fees for your expertise. After he left, 3 more representatives made similar requests. By evening, Ilara had 6 consulting contracts sitting on her desk, each one representing income she'd earned through her own work rather than her husband's position. You're building an empire, Isla observed. I'm solving problems for people who need solutions. That's what empire building looks like when you're actually competent. Isla grinned. The gossip columns are going to lose their minds. 2 weeks after the summit ended, a letter arrived from the capital. Alara recognized her mother's handwriting and almost threw it away unread. Curiosity 1. Alara, we have heard reports of the summit you hosted. Reports that suggest you've achieved some measure of success in your foreign marriage. Your father believes we may have been hasty in severing ties. He proposes a reconciliation. You could visit, reintroduce yourself to society, perhaps help repair some of the damage your initial scandal caused. Margot has expressed interest in visiting Monterran. She would like to see what you've built and perhaps repair your sisterly relationship. We await your response. Alara read it twice, then showed it to Raphael. They want to use your success to rehabilitate their reputation, he said. Classic. And Margot wants to see what I've built. Probably to find ways to diminish it. What will you do? Alara thought about the cathedral, about her mother's cold assessment of her worth, about Margot's false tears and Cassian's public cruelty, about becoming someone those people couldn't even recognize. She pulled out paper and wrote a response. Mother, I appreciate your interest in reconciliation. However, I have no desire to return to the capital or repair relationships that were broken by others' choices. Not mine. My life is here now. My work is here. The people who matter to me are here. I wish you and Father well. I wish Margot and Cassian happiness in their marriage. But I no longer have space in my life for people who valued me only when I became useful to their ambitions. Do not contact me again. Duchess Alara Whitcomb de Aragon of Monterran. She sealed it and sent it before she could second-guess the decision. How does it feel? Raphael asked. Final, like closing a door that should have been shut a long time ago. That night, she stood on the tower again, looking out at the duchy that had become home. Lights flickered in villages below. Smoke rose from hundreds of hearths. People lived their lives, most of them never knowing the Duchess who'd helped reform their infrastructure or negotiate treaties that kept them safe. That was fine. She didn't need them to know. She just needed the work to matter. You're thinking loud thoughts, Raphael said, joining her with 2 cups of the terrible mountain wine. I'm thinking about how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was nobody. A failed bride, a family embarrassment. Now I'm negotiating regional alliances and people are paying for my consulting services. You were never nobody. You were just in a place that couldn't see your value. Maybe. Or maybe I became valuable by learning to do valuable things. Why not both? She sipped the wine, which still tasted like regret, but was starting to grow on her. I got a letter from Philippa, she said. She's proud of me. Says I've exceeded every expectation. Have you exceeded your own expectations? Alara thought about the girl who'd walked down the cathedral aisle, so certain of her purpose, so desperate to be worthy, about who she'd become when that certainty shattered. I don't know what I expected, she admitted. I never thought past being someone's wife, never imagined building something that was actually mine. And now that you have, now I want more. More reforms, more treaties, more problems to solve. She looked at him. Is that greedy? It's ambitious. There's a difference. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the night settle over the mountains. I never thanked you, Alara said eventually. For what? For seeing something in me I didn't see in myself. For giving me space to fail and learn and become competent through actual work instead of just performance. Raphael was quiet for a moment. I didn't give you anything. You took what was available and made it into something better than I imagined possible. Still, thank you. He raised his cup. To unexpected outcomes. She clinked hers against his. To building something real. 3 months later, Alara traveled to Duke Brennan's duchy to implement administrative reforms. She spent 6 weeks there, training staff, reorganizing systems, teaching the approaches she developed in Monterran. The work was hard but satisfying, watching broken systems become functional, seeing people's relief when complexity became clarity. On her last day, Brennan's entire council thanked her formally. You've given us tools we'll use for decades, Brennan said. We're in your debt. You paid me well, we're even. Money isn't the same as transformation. She returned to Monterran to find Raphael had expanded the war room to accommodate the growing number of projects they were managing. Treaties with 8 duchies now. Security alliance functioning smoothly. Trade increasing across the region. We're becoming a model others follow, Raphael said, showing her the reports. People cite Monterran as evidence that cooperation works better than competition. That feels strange. Get used to it. You're changing how leadership looks in this region. That winter, Elara received an invitation to speak at a gathering of noble women, specifically about navigating unconventional paths in traditional systems. She almost declined, uncomfortable with the idea of being seen as a role model. Isla convinced her otherwise. There are women trapped the way you were trapped, told they're only valuable as decorative assets. Your story tells them that's not the only option. So Elara went. Spoke to 40 women about rejection and rebuilding, about finding worth in work instead of validation, about becoming someone you don't recognize and learning that's okay. After, Lady Sorrel approached her with 3 other women. We're leaving, Sorrel said. Our marriages, our family's expectations, all of it. We're going to build something different. Where will you go? Wherever we're needed, like you did. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. It's terrifying. You've said that before. You've also said it's worth it. It is, but it's still terrifying. They hugged her, these women she barely knew, these strangers who'd seen in her story permission to write their own. A year after the cathedral, Elara received a package from Margot. Inside was a letter and a piece of jewelry, the necklace Margot had worn at her wedding to Cassian. The letter was brief. Elara, you were right about everything. My marriage is a nightmare. Cassian is charming in public and cold in private. I'm trapped in the life I thought I wanted. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for taking what was yours and realizing too late that it was poison. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that you won. Not because my life is terrible, but because you built something real while I'm still performing happiness for people who don't care. Margot Elara held the necklace, feeling its weight. Expensive. Beautiful. Meaningless. She sent it back with a short note. Margot, keep the necklace. It suits the life you chose. I hope you find a way out. Not because I forgive you, I don't, really, but because no one deserves to be trapped. That evening, she showed the exchange to Raphael. Do you actually hope she finds a way out? He asked. I think so. Holding on to anger takes energy I'd rather spend on other things. She paused. But I'm also glad it's her problem, not mine. That's growth. Or selfishness. Why not both? 18 months after arriving in Monteran, Elara stood before the regional council. 20 duchy leaders gathered to formalize the cooperation network they'd built. She'd been asked to present the closing remarks. She looked out at faces that had changed from skeptical to respectful, from dismissive to genuinely interested in her perspective. When I came to Monteran, she began, I was running from humiliation. I had no skills beyond arranging flowers and making polite conversation. I was valuable only as potential decoration for someone else's life. She paused, letting the honesty settle. This region gave me the opportunity to become something else. Someone who could solve problems, negotiate solutions, build systems that actually helped people. She gestured around the room. You gave me that by being willing to look past my history and focus on my work. The question now is, what comes next? We've proven cooperation works. We've built frameworks that make all our duchies stronger. The work isn't finished. It's never finished. But we've demonstrated something important. She met Duke Brennan's eyes, then Henrik's, then others scattered through the room. We've demonstrated that worth isn't determined by birth or beauty or following traditional paths. Worth comes from what you build, what you solve, what you contribute. And anyone can contribute if given the chance. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Duke Henrik. Others joined until the entire council was on their feet. Elara felt overwhelmed and inadequate and terrified and proud all at once. These people, powerful, experienced leaders, were applauding her. Not her title, not her marriage, not her performance of competence, her actual work. After the session ended, she found a quiet corner and just breathed. Raphael found her there. You did well. I barely held it together. Holding it together while barely managing is still holding it together. She laughed, sudden and genuine. That's terrible wisdom. It's honest wisdom. 2 years after the cathedral, Elara received one final letter from the capital. It was from Philippa. Dearest Elara, I'm writing to tell you that your mother passed away last week. Illness, sudden, nothing dramatic. I thought you should know. Your father is selling the manor. Margot has separated from Cassian. Scandal, naturally. The family you ran from is dissolving. I suspect you don't care much. That's good. It means you've truly moved on. But I wanted you to know something. Before she died, your mother read the accounts of what you've accomplished in Monteran. I know because she came to see me, first time in 20 years. She asked if you were happy. I told her yes. She cried. Said she'd raised you all wrong, pushed you toward a life that would have destroyed you. She never apologized to you, was too proud for that. But she knew. In the end, she knew. I thought you'd want to understand that your transformation affected even people who tried to keep you small. With love and pride, Philippa Elara read the letter 3 times. Felt complicated emotions she couldn't quite name. Grief, maybe, for a relationship that never existed. Relief that her mother had recognized the truth before dying. Sadness that recognition had come too late to matter. She showed the letter to Raphael that evening. "Do you regret not reconciling?" he asked. "No, some things break too thoroughly to mend, but I'm glad she understood eventually." "Are you happy?" Raphael asked. "The question your mother wanted answered. Are you actually happy?" Elara thought about that. Happy wasn't simple. Her work was exhausting. She still had moments of doubt, of wondering if she was faking competence. She missed Philippa. She worried about treaty negotiations and resource management and 1,000 daily crises. But she was useful. Actually, tangibly useful in ways that mattered. "Yes," she said. "I'm happy. Not perfectly, not constantly, but genuinely. I wake up with purpose. I go to sleep knowing I did something that mattered. That's more than I ever hoped for standing in that cathedral." "Good," Raphael said simply. 3 years after the rejection that destroyed her old life, Elara stood in the same cathedral where it had happened. She'd been invited to speak at a conference on regional governance. The irony wasn't lost on her, returning to the site of her greatest humiliation as an acknowledged expert on leadership and reform. The cathedral looked smaller than she remembered, less intimidating, just stone and glass and human construction. She gave her speech to an audience that included nobles, administrators, and reform advocates from across multiple regions. Talked about building systems that valued competence over pedigree, about creating opportunities for people society had written off, about transforming failure into foundation. After, a young woman approached her. Couldn't have been more than 20, wearing clothes that suggested minor nobility, but not wealth. "Duchess Elara, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For proving that being rejected doesn't mean being worthless. I was engaged to someone my family chose. He broke it off for someone richer. Everyone said I was ruined." The girl's eyes were bright with determination. "But I heard your story. Decided if you could build something real from rejection, maybe I could too." "What did you build?" "I'm training as a physician, first woman in my family to work. My parents are furious, but I'm going to be good at it." Elara felt her throat tighten. "You will be, and it'll be terrifying and hard and worth it. That's what you always say." "Because it's always true." After the girl left, Elara stood alone in the cathedral for a moment, looked at the altar where she'd been rejected, the aisle she'd walked down in ruins. She felt nothing but distant curiosity, like looking at a historical site significant to someone else's story. Raphael joined her. "Ready to go?" "Yes, I'm done with this place." They walked out together into sunlight that felt warmer than she remembered. Montaron's carriage waited, blue and silver, bearing the duchy's seal with her name beneath Raphael's. Duchess Elara Whitcomb de Aragon. Not perfectly adequate, not decorative, not someone else's rejected bride. Just herself. Finally, completely, triumphantly herself. And that was enough.